Blurry memories of a family flicker before a single, vibrant eye snaps open. A clear vision of a happy family with a pink-haired mother and blonde father surrounds a smiling young boy. A tiny fairy joyfully confirms that the soul's rebirth has been a complete success. A decorative frame captures the stark realization of a previous life ending in death. Memories of a past life reveal her former happiness while engaged to Prince Salt. During the wedding, a blonde saintess blesses Prince Salt and his brown-haired bride amidst falling petals. She reflects on the divine shield granted exclusively to the chosen saintess of the realm. Prince Salt tenderly kisses the hand of his bride, sealing their union with a vow. The brown-haired bride blushes deeply, overwhelmed by the prince's public display of affection. The saintess stands between the couple, her hands clasped in a silent gesture of prayer. With a cheerful smile, the saintess officially declares the marriage ceremony concluded. The silver-haired prince offers his sincere gratitude to Saintess Jeanette for her holy blessing. While her parents focused solely on her brother, she felt the prince was her only source of kindness. Music fills the air as the celebratory banquet begins in the opulent, sunlit hall. Despite the successful celebration, the black-haired bride senses a growing, cold discomfort from the surrounding guests. Her father sternly warns her against bringing any disgrace upon their family name during the event. Her parents coldly remind her that her dark features mark her as a witch and demand total secrecy. The black-haired woman looks down in sorrow, burdened by the heavy weight of her family's harsh expectations. A somber truth reveals that magic users are a rare and often misunderstood occurrence in the kingdom. While light magic brings prestige, she knows her dark power would only incite fear and hatred. Cruel whispers fill the room as guests mock her appearance and claim the saintess is more worthy. She is haunted by the superstition that her dark eyes and hair are omens of terrible luck. Deep within, she acknowledges the immense and dangerous magical potential she possesses. The heavy secret of her power must remain hidden from the world at all costs. The grand banquet continues with guests mingling around tables laden with wine and delicacies. Sensing something amiss, the black-haired woman pauses and begins to search the hall for the prince. A sudden, sharp realization catches her off guard as she looks toward a partially open doorway. From the shadows, she overhears a voice lamenting her position as the prince's chosen wife. The eavesdropped conversation continues, revealing a shared sense of frustration and resentment behind closed doors. Her breath hitches as the full weight of the betrayal begins to dawn on her. She discovers Prince Salt and the blonde saintess in an intimate, forbidden embrace upon a sofa. A high-pitched scream escapes her as the prince reacts with shock and demands to know her business. The silver-haired man berates her for intruding, while she reels from the sight of his infidelity. Fear and heartbreak consume her as she trembles under the prince's sudden, aggressive hostility. He calls her malicious just as a heavy thud sounds from the doors being thrown open. A sudden, booming crash echoes through the room as the blonde saintess hysterically begs for help. Confused and disoriented, the black-haired woman stares in shock at the chaos unfolding around her. The saintess craftily feigns an injury, accusing the prince's fiancé of a violent and unprovoked attack. Her eyes suddenly ignite with a terrifying red glow as she desperately tries to maintain her innocence. The king gasps in horror at her transformed eyes, while guards violently force her to the ground. As the prince comforts her, Saintess Jeanette reveals a sinister, triumphant smirk hidden from everyone else. The black-haired woman screams her innocence as a surge of dark, uncontrollable energy erupts from her. Dark, shadowy mist lashes out toward the startled king as the situation spirals into total chaos. Panic ensues as people shout for the king's safety amidst the violent explosion of dark power. Saintess Jeanette collapses in a pool of blood as the crowd cries out for her protection. The black-haired woman is consumed by the dark energy, her expression one of pure, unbridled terror. Visions of holy figures praying coincide with the appearance of glowing, celestial chains of light. Shackles of light bind her as the prince and nobles accuse her of being possessed by evil. Bound and broken, she is told the church will investigate her soul for signs of demonic influence. She reaches out in desperation, but the prince looks back with nothing but cold, unmoving contempt. A command rings out to seize and imprison the woman immediately. Thrown into a dungeon, So endures unimaginable brutality while locked away in the cold shadows. After crippling her, Saintess Jeanette watches from behind bars, claiming a devil resides within the girl's tongue. The blonde saintess cruelly suggests removing Sue's tongue and eyes to purge the alleged demonic presence. Left bloodied and broken, Sue suffers the horrific loss of her sight and speech. Jeanette feigns concern while Prince Saltus comforts her, insisting that the tragedy is not her fault. Saltus looks down at the mutilated girl, viewing her solely as a criminal who attacked royalty. Coldly turning his back, the prince concludes that beheading is the only fitting punishment. A grim sentence is handed down as Sao is dragged toward her final destination. Onlookers mock her appearance, demanding that the supposed villain be eliminated for good. The crowd jeers at Sue's dark features, labeling her a disgusting witch as she nears the scaffold. In her final moments, Sue learns that Jeanette has brought a malicious parting message from her family. Leaning in with a smirk, Jeanette reveals that Sue's family is glad to see her die. The saintess mocks Sophie's misery while gloating about her future happiness with Prince Saltus. Jeanette puts on a deceptive performance of shock as Sao reacts in silent, desperate rage. The order is given and the heavy blade of the guillotine falls, ending her life. Floating in an abyss, Sue questions the unfair cruelty of her former existence. She wonders if her tragic end was due to her physical traits or hidden power. Watching over her broken spirit, mystical fairies note the immense magical energy she once held. They acknowledge the severe abuse she suffered simply for possessing a rare and powerful gift. Sensing the corruption of her past, they decide to cleanse her soul before it is lost. The yellow fairy takes pity on Sue's tattered state, marveling at the weight of her suffering. Claiming her soul will be a mutual benefit, the spirits prepare for her rebirth. A sudden, bright cry echoes through a sunlit garden of roses. A pink-haired queen cradles a newborn baby in a scene of serene beauty. The infant wails loudly, her small face scrunched in a common show of life. The king promises to protect Princess Maribel, boasting of his status as a powerful ruler. Her mother beams with joy while holding her daughter close. Baby Maribel blinks, her sparkling blue eyes revealing a hidden depth of awareness. She reflects on her incredible luck at being reborn into such a loving family. A dark residue appears on the infant's arm, hinting at her past. Flashbacks of her previous execution haunt her as she fears being hated for her strength. Wrapped in a blanket, the baby wonders if her new world will eventually turn against her. Her mother checks on her, unaware of the complex thoughts swirling in the child's mind. Maribel stares at a red flower, finding a small moment of peace in her croup. A small hand drops a yellow blossom into the crind. A blonde boy excitedly offers a flower to his baby sister, Maribel. The young prince shares a warm hug with his mother, the queen. Adoring her daughter, the queen marvels at how truly cute the infant is. While her family sees an angel, Maribel remembers her past as an executed woman accused of demonic possession. She embraces her new identity as a princess, determined to survive this second chance. Fairies gather around the crib, drawing the attention of both the baby and her brother. Maribel watches the spirits in awe, questioning if they are real. A playful fairy dances before her, delighted by the child's reaction. Attendants discuss the rare fairy tale blessings, noting the spirits are celebrating the princess's birth. Reaching out, Maribel inadvertently triggers a small, sharp discharge of energy. The spirits vanish in an instant, leaving the queen confused by the infant's sudden distress. Her mother offers comfort, wondering if the child is sad because the fairies have departed. The queen reaches for her daughter as the magical atmosphere lingers in the room. Holding the baby tenderly, she assures Maribel that she is deeply loved by everyone. Baby Maribel watches playful green fairies while reflecting that they are rarely cruel. A dark wolf fairy appears, illustrating that all spirits share nature's power. Her mother's warm smile fills the room. Narrative explains that a fairy's nature is shaped by their environment. A sudden thud disrupts the queen's quiet walk. King Malik maintains a stern royal gaze. Maribel is horrified to learn she is back in the Wood Kingdom. History recounts the religious war between Eret and the monotheistic ward. King Malik departs to lead the border army. Narration explains the rising aggression led by the manipulative Saint Jeanette. A sharp alarm identifies Jeanette and the crown prince. The royal couple shares a supportive embrace. Young Randy watches his father's departure somberly. The young prince's eyes glow with determination. King Malik offers one last comforting smile. The king departs for the border with his army. A torch flickers in the quiet evening. A lone guard stands watch in the smill. While Randy sleeps, Maribel awakens and appreciates her kind mother. Bodies of guards litter the dark hallway. A bloody hand reaches toward the sleeping queen. Maribel sleeps soundly in her mother's arms. A small yellow fairy watches over them. The baby feels truly cherished and safe. Torches illuminate the silent palace exterior. A guard turns, questioning a suspicious sound. A masked intruder stands over a fallen bard. A heavy boot steps onto the stone. Bodies of fallen guards lie in a doorway. Randy's eyes snap open in sudden alarm. Randy wakes, questioning the unnatural silence of the palace. He grabs a training sword and investigates. The boy peeks nervously into the corridor. The prince gasps as a dying guard's hand reaches out. Randy stands paralyzed before the bloody scene. He trips in his haste to escape. A scream of pure terror escapes him. Randy runs through the palace seeking his family. A dark shadow falls over the bed. The assassin raises a dagger to strike. Randy shouts for the intruder to stop, startling his mother. The queen wakes in terror as the blade descends. A sudden impact stops the lethal strike. The queen cries out to the fairies for protection as feathers scatter. A green fairy manifests a powerful defensive shield. The assassin is stunned by the unexpected magic. Baby Maribel watches the glowing barrier curiously. Randy realizes the attack was timed for the king's absence. The brave prince lunges at the assassin to defend his mother. Desperate cries for Randy fill the air. Baby Maribel huffs in a panic as she watches her mother and brother in mortal danger. She fears that being discovered as a magic user will make her hated again, while a masked assassin glares. The intruder lunges toward the infant with a sharp, lethal blade. The queen and young Randy scream for Maribel in sheer desperation as the assassin strikes. Haunted by her past execution, the infant resolves that she will not allow herself to die again. Terrified of repeating her horrific fate, Maribel's eye begins to glow with a chilling blue light. A quiet whimper of fear escapes the baby as she struggles against the encroaching darkness. A sudden, violent eruption of black energy surges forth from the infant princess. Sinister shadows with glowing red eyes swirl through the nursery, consuming the atmosphere. The baby wails as her uncontrolled magic targets the approaching assassin. The intruder lets out a guttural cry as the dark energy strikes him down. As the assassin collapses in pain, the queen realizes that this terrifying force is not spiritual power. She wonders if the infant possesses true magical power while the spirits are scattered by the blast. The fairies panic as they realize Maribel is losing control, unsure of how to contain her power. King Malik calls out to his son while Randy crawls forward with glowing, determined eyes. A heavy thud echoes as the queen cries out in pain from the chaotic energy. Randy pulls his baby sister into a protective embrace, whispering for her not to cry. He promises to always protect her, prompting the fairies to combine their magic for a defensive shroud. The spirits work quickly to cover the siblings in a warm, protective glow as they huddle together. Randy smiles with relief that his family is safe before collapsing from his injuries. The queen's voice breaks in despair as her son falls unconscious while shielding his sister. A desperate plea for help echoes through the silent, moonlit palace grounds. The scene shifts to the dark night sky as time passes after the attack. In another kingdom, a silver-haired man berates an assassin for failing to kill a mere newborn. He notes with a sinister smile that the little princess clearly possesses formidable magical strength. The man mocks the queen's beauty while Jeanette sighs with boredom in the background. He warns that while fairies are common in Eret, Maribel's specific power poses a danger to their lands. The silver-haired man coughs before declaring his intent to use his entire army to destroy the kingdom of Eret. Jeanette offers a wicked smirk, promising that her god will support his war of destruction. Palace maids move quickly through the halls to attend to the royal family. The maids comfort the pink-haired queen who remains shaken by the night's events. Her attention is caught by a sudden, rhythmic flickering of light coming from the nursery. Rushing to the crib, the queen thanks goodness as Maribel awakens, wondering if she is truly alive. King Malik returns and embraces his wife, asking if the princess has finally woken up. He somberly confirms that Randy is still unconscious, though his physical wounds have miraculously healed. Two fairies observe the scene with expressions of deep concern for the children. Maribel blames herself for her brother's condition, weeping as she begs for him not to die. The infant's loud, sorrowful wails fill the room as she is consumed by guilt over her strength. Her mother offers tender comfort, assuring Maribel that everything will be all right and that both children are loved. The quiet is broken by a sudden shout as Randy finally awakens and rushes toward his family. The young prince sits up in bed, looking around with wide, confused eyes. A bright smile lights up Randy's face as he calls out for his parents and his sister. Malik and the queen drop to their knees to welcome their son back with open arms. Maribel feels a wave of immense relief, watching her father's joy as the family is reunited. The king expresses his deep gratitude for the effort made to save his children. The fairies are overjoyed that everything went well, their wings fluttering with excitement. Malik asks if Randy is okay, and the boy cheerfully confirms his well-being amidst sparkling fairy dust. Randy gazes forward with clear blue eyes, the shadow of the attack finally lifting. The royal family shares a quiet moment of bonding on the large bed. Malik looks seriously at Maribel, concluding that she definitely possesses a rare and powerful magical gift. Haunted by the trauma of her past life, Maribel remembers her final moments before her execution. The infant princess trembles with fear as she recalls the moment her secret was discovered. A group of stern, high-ranking nobles look down with cold, judgmental expressions during her previous trial. A small, yellow-clad fairy watches over the baby with a quiet and somber expression. Awakening from her nightmare, Maribel rubs her eyes while a hand offers gentle comfort. The pink-haired queen and young Randy share a joyful, loving hug with the infant princess. King Malik praises his son for his bravery, while the queen expresses her lingering concern for their safety. Randy asks if magic and spiritual power are different, prompting a lesson on the origins of their strength. Narrative explains that magic is a forceful, aggressive way of taking power from nature to use within oneself. Malik reassures his children that despite the common hatred for magic, the way they use their power remains the same. The king promises to find a skilled magician to help the princess master her extraordinary gifts. Maribel is surprised by her family's easy acceptance of her power, contrasting with the hatred she faced previously. Randy laughs with pure, infectious joy. His previous fears completely vanished. A close-up of Maribel's eye reveals the depth of her intelligence and reflection. The infant princess smiles brightly as she is surrounded by the overwhelming love of her family. Fairies flutter around the crib, keeping the baby company as she rests in the nursery. Political tension rises as news arrives that a nobleman associated with the Wood Kingdom died mysteriously in prison. Malik and the queen discuss the potential involvement of Saintess Jeanette and the new crown prince in recent events. Maribel suspects Jeanette's manipulative hand is behind the increasing border disputes and suspicious intruders. The royal couple shares a serious moment, contemplating the growing threats to their peaceful kingdom. Sensing the gravity of the situation, the infant princess looks up with a focused and determined gaze. The family finds comfort in each other, sleeping together in one large bed to feel safe. In the quiet of the night, Maribel remains awake, her thoughts troubled by the looming conflict. Randy bursts into the room with a pillow, happily announcing his plan to sleep with his mother and sister. The baby rests comfortably tucked between her parents, feeling the security of their presence. Randy drifts off into a peaceful sleep, his arm draped protectively toward his baby sister. Maribel offers a soft, contented smile as the queen pulls her into a warm embrace. The infant princess reflects on the warmth of her family and their unwavering support despite her powers. Looking at the silhouettes of her enemies, Maribel vows to protect her family from the coming storm. In a dark, moonlit forest, a young black-haired boy with red eyes faces a pack of growling wolves. The boy remains calm, even as a massive, blue-flamed wolf spirit stands directly over him. Standing firm in the shadows of the woods, the mysterious boy displays a chilling lack of fear. The black-haired boy walks through the trees, accompanied by several of the glowing-eyed wolf spirits. Back at the palace, a maid informs the queen that dinner is served while fairies play near the baby. The queen is startled to realize how much time has passed while she was lost in thought. Looking out from the balcony at the darkening sky, she notes with worry that King Malik has not returned. Narration confirms that the king is late, heightening the sense of unease within the palace walls. The story continues with the title, "The Fairy Princess Has Decided to Take Revenge." Maribel lies in her crib, watching her mother prepare for the evening. A wide yawn escapes the infant princess as she feels the weight of exhaustion setting in. A yellow fairy strikes a proud pose, declaring that it is time for the princess's training to begin. Caught off guard, the baby looks at the fairy with a confused and skeptical expression. Maribel tries to sleep, thinking of baby's only job is rest, but the persistent fairy refuses to let her. The fairy playfully but firmly pulls on the infant's hair to keep her awake and focused on the lesson. The fairy explains that the Wood Kingdom's strict religious beliefs only recognize their own god, Lambanos. Because of this, the spiritual and nature-based culture of Erit is viewed as a dangerous heresy by their neighbors. The yellow fairy continues her lecture, her expression turning more serious as she discusses the kingdom's history. Mariabelle focuses her will, attempting to channel her magic into a small, controlled spark. Sharp discharges of energy flicker from the baby's hand as she fears her family's reaction if she loses control. The queen expresses her deepening anxiety to her maids as the night grows darker and the king remains missing. A sudden dark premonition takes hold. A green fairy brings a tar. A sudden gasp startles the princess. Fairies watch over the sleeping infant. The fairy asks what she sees. A bright light confirms her vision. Maribel sees the forest sunlight. Through her magical vision, Mariabelle observes King Malik in full armor as he leads his men through the dark woods. The yellow fairy is shocked to see a terrifying monster that is neither animal nor fairy suddenly appearing in the forest. A massive, multi-eyed red wolf looms dangerously over the king, baring its sharp teeth. Mariabelle screams for her father to watch out, but the fairy warns that he cannot hear her, forcing the baby to try and use her magic. The fairy suggests that Mariabelle focus and redirect her magical energy even though the target is quite far away. The baby struggles to control her power while the monster lunges at the king, realizing her strength is still inconsistent. As Mariabelle yells for her father's safety, a sudden blue shield of energy erupts to protect him. Malik is shocked by this sudden barrier. The king blocks the monster's bite. Malik's knights assist in the battle. A baby's cry echoes through the nursery. The exhausted infant catches her breath. Mariabelle stares up at the fairy. The quiet nursery stands empty now. Mariabelle vows to master her powers. She pledges to protect her family. Daytime brings a shift in atmosphere. Preparations for a festival are underway. Sunlight bathes the majestic royal palace. Maids hurry through the palace halls. Fairies help prepare jewelry for Mariabelle. A voice asks if she's ready. Randy has grown into a prince. Grown-up Mariabelle greets her brother joyfully. Randy notes that the nobles have already gathered for the ceremony and expresses his hope that his sister can find many good friends. The princess laughs with genuine, bright happiness. Tonight marks Mariabelle's 12th birthday celebration. The siblings walk toward the festivities. Randy calls out to his sister. Mariabelle is surprised by this worth. Mariabelle laughs while suggesting that her blonde brother is the one who is truly angelic as they stand among celebratory flowers. The siblings share their happiness about finally holding a family ceremony, while the yellow fairy watches them with a content expression. Mariabelle asks if the kidnapping rumors are true. Randy observes the guests arriving below and remarks on the gathering of various nobles for the evening's special event. Nearby nobles gossiped about a boy who was kidnapped by fairies and raised by a black dog, noting how his appearance changed as he grew. The legend of the demonic black dog is described as a symbol of evil, linked to the boy whose hair and eyes changed color. Maribel is unsettled as the nobles mock the boy's rejection by his parents and his supposedly annoying personality. The gossiping nobles laughingly wonder if the boy behaves like a wild animal, leaving the pink-haired princess feeling deeply saddened. Randy advises his sister to avoid the people at the party who are unworthy of being her friends. Maribel watches the palace grounds pensively. The princess notices a mysterious maid. Randy and Maribel watch the newcomer. Malik celebrates his daughter's 12th birthday. The pink-haired queen and grown-up Randy share a warm hug with Mariabelle, offering their heartfelt congratulations on her birthday. 12-year-old Maribel laughs with radiant, pure happiness as she celebrates her special day. A green-haired man in spectacles claps along with the maids as the room fills with rhythmic clapping. Professor Crowley looks away with a bead of sweat, feeling slightly awkward amidst the celebration. Maribel rushes over and joyfully greets the green-haired man as Professor Crowley. The princess insists that the professor must attend her birthday ceremony later today. Professor Crowley appears flustered and shocked by her enthusiastic request. Maribel mentions a rumor she heard about a boy who was kidnapped by a fairy and eventually returned home. Professor Crowley explains that she is likely talking about Alan Reed, the son of Marquis Reed, noting that such returns are rare and mysterious. Maribel ponders the name Alan Reed while the yellow fairy watches her from atop her head. The yellow fairy excitedly declares that the phenomenon is known as the Fairies Exchange. She explains that it happens when a fairy takes a blonde child simply because she has fallen in love with him. The fairy notes that they leave behind old records or magical items out of a mere whim, leading the horrified princess to call it terrible. Maribel looks deeply saddened by the heartless nature of the exchange. The princess feels a heavy sense of pity, imagining the boy's loneliness and comparing his suffering to the isolation of her own past life. She clenches her fists in worry, wondering if the boy is still in trouble and what could be done for him. A sudden, sharp flick lands on her forehead, making her cry out as a red mark appears.
Professor Crawley advises Maribel not to underestimate her own strength and warns her to stay away from troublesome situations.
Randy shows off a massive birthday cake as the king and queen watch their children bond. A floral announcement signals the entrance of the king, the queen, and the crown prince. The presenter officially introduces the princess as the hall erupts into loud, rhythmic clapping. The royal family stands together at the top of the grand staircase, acknowledging the cheering guests. Maribel smiles with gentle grace while framed by blooming pink roses. Nearby guests whisper in admiration, noting how beautiful the princess looks this evening. Maribel's gaze is drawn to a balcony where a dark-haired boy stands with a massive, glowing blue wolf. The black-haired boy watches her with a chillingly intense stare from his red eyes. A close-up of Maribel's eye shows her shock as she recognizes the mysterious figure. Narration describes the demonic dog standing beside the boy, a creature that is invisible to everyone else at the party. The mysterious boy turns his back on the festivities and begins to walk away. He exits through the large balcony doors, disappearing into the night. Maribel looks down pensively, her mind troubled by the sight of the boy. Amidst the constant hum of chatter, a purple-haired maid secretly pours a dark liquid into the wine glasses. The maid carefully prepares the tray, hiding her suspicious actions from the other staff. Another maid stops the newcomer, noting that this is the first time she has seen her working in the palace. The purple-haired maid nervously explains that she was sent as extra help because of the shortage of staff, asking if she did something wrong. The maid walks away with the tray as the other worker watches her with a confused expression. Pausing for a moment, the purple-haired maid looks back over her shoulder with a cold and calculating gaze. Guests gather on the grand staircase, eager to catch a glimpse of the royal family. The queen radiates elegance in her formal gown. Maribel offers a polite smile as she receives praise from the surrounding nobles. The princess glances toward a group of gossiping guests with a focused look. Her thoughts return to the image of the boy and the demonic wolf on the balcony. She concludes that the person standing next to the demon dog must be the boy from the rumors. Maribel is startled by a sudden voice calling her name. A young nobleman takes her hand and asks if she will grant him a dance later in the night. Randy quickly intervenes, reminding the boy that Maribel is too young and has not yet made her official debut. The blonde prince leans in to remind his sister not to forget the promise she made to him while the fairies giggle. A middle-aged noble couple drags their grumpy son away from the royal siblings. Randy reminds Maribel of her promise that he would be the very first person to dance with her today. The prince glares fiercely at another approaching suitor, who stammers an apology and runs away. Randy jokes about suitors waiting 100 years to reach Maribel, while the princess laughs off his intense protectiveness. A maid offers Princess Maribel some juice while wearing a faint, unsettling smirk. In the brightly lit hall, Randy officially asks his sister for a dance. The blonde prince offers his hand with a charming smile. Maribel accepts with a radiant expression of joy. Guests watch the royal siblings with delight. King Malik and the queen look on with pride as the music starts. Randy leads Maribel onto the dance floor, surrounded by flowers. The pink-haired princess closes her eyes, soaking in the beautiful moment. The siblings spin across the floor in a graceful dance. Maribel suddenly recalls the isolation of her past life and the pain of a previous betrayal. A soft, quick thud sounds as she misses a step, her focus flickering for a moment. Randy catches her and lifts her high, pulling her back into the present joy. They continue their lively dance under the watchful eyes of the court. Randy wishes her a happy birthday, while guests note how he treats her like a true princess. A noblewoman with a fan watches with an approving gaze. As the dance ends, Randy is swarmed by admiring noblewomen, leaving Maribel to step away. The maid returns to offer Maribel another glass of juice. A fairy asks Maribel if she's feeling tired as she holds the drink. Maribel's eye widens as she notices something peculiar. The princess looks out at the darkened balcony, lost in thought. She steps outside, following a sudden urge or feeling. The fairy and princess watch from the shadows as the suspicious maid acts strangely. One maid instructs another to carry a pitcher, and the purple-haired servant agrees. Alone for a moment, the servant pours a dark, mysterious liquid into the drink pitcher. She looks around carefully, ensuring her treasonous act remains hidden. A confused nobleman wonders who took his cup from the table. A lone candle flickers, casting long shadows across the palace. The peaceful garden fountain stands silent under the moonlight. Maribel's attention is caught by a figure in the garden. The fairy identifies the terrifying creatures beside the boy as devil dods. The black-haired boy watches her with cold crimson eyes. A sense of impending doom hangs over the festivities. A dark substance taints the red juice as Mariabelle watches in frozen shock. Unaware servants continue pouring the poison drink for the guests. A noblewoman eagerly takes a glass, finding the drink looks very good. Guests toast to the celebration, and a nobleman offers a glass to Prince Randy. Randy drinks the red liquid, thanking the guest for the refreshment. Mariabelle is startled by a sudden scream and the boy's chilling presence. Panic erupts as a man nearby begins coughing up blood and collapses. The ballroom turns into a nightmare as multiple guests fall to the floor in agony. Mariabelle stares in absolute horror at the unfolding tragedy. The princess screams out as she sees her brother collapsed and bleeding on the floor. The atmosphere becomes heavy with death and despair. A scene of total chaos unfolds as guards and family rush to the fallen victims. The queen and Mariabelle rush to Randy's side as he gasps for air. Mariabelle cries out for her brother while the queen begs everyone to stay back.
The mysterious boy stands coldly nearby, watching the royal family suffering.
Mariabelle sobs over her brother's dying form, her world shattering.
King Malik bellows for the guards to seal the palace and arrest every suspect immediately.
Mariabelle cries out in agony as Randy lies bleeding on the floor.
A nobleman is seized by guards while explaining that he only gave the king a cup from the table. The princess points toward the table where she previously left her own cup. She remembers the purple-haired maid bringing her that specific cup during the party. A horrifying realization strikes Mariabelle as she concludes that she was the true target. The yellow fairy reacts with pure shock to the princess's revelation. Clutching her head in despair, the small fairy feels overwhelmed by the tragedy. A blue-haired fairy arrives, asking if the princess is all right amidst the chaos. The fairies promise to take care of her during this dark hour. Mariabelle asks if her brother was poisoned while the queen holds him close. Tears stream down the green-haired fairy's face as she watches the scene. The yellow fairy looks on with a heavy heart and deep concern. Randy coughs up blood as Mariabelle wonders if his life can be saved. The princess pleads for help to identify the type of poison used. Mariabelle stares at the black-haired boy with wide, hopeful eyes. The queen bellows for the staff to bring help immediately. A wooden barrel sits full of the suspicious liquid as a wet gurgle sounds. Another young noble collapses, vomiting blood into a basin as guests watch. A middle-aged nobleman furiously points at the black-haired boy, accusing him of the poisoning. He shouts that the boy's demonic nature and evil fairies are behind the attack. The boy watches with a chilling gaze from his crimson eyes. The nobleman demands an arrest while a massive shadow looms over him. Mariabelle catches her breath as a sudden dark presence appears behind her. A massive black wolf wreathed in blue fire lets out a low, terrifying growl. Guests recoil in terror, convinced that the beast is about to attack them. The noble continues to scream insults, calling the boy a useless and cursed burden. Mariabelle steps forward, declaring that she has heard quite enough of his cruelty. The princess stands defiantly in front of the boy, stopping the noble in his tracks. King Malik and the queen watch their daughter's bold intervention with shock. The nobleman tells her to stay back, but Mariabelle clenches her fist in refusal. She demands that they focus on removing the poison instead of making baseless accusations. The noble falls silent as his own son continues to suffer behind him. A mysterious voice from the water offers the princess help. Mariabelle and the fairy look around in confusion, searching for the speaker. Spilled wine bubbles and fizzes as the magical atmosphere in the room changes. Water cascades from the ceiling like a waterfall, startling the palace servants. A blue-haired mermaid descends from above, appearing within the falling water. The princess watches the magical being in complete and total awe. The mermaid explains that a queen from her realm is calling for Mariabelle. She reaches out and takes the princess's hand to lead her away. The yellow fairy looks on with worry as her friend is whisked away. A huge splash sounds as a massive whirlpool erupts in the middle of the hall. The fairy reaches out, trying to stop the princess from disappearing into the waves. The black-haired boy and his wolf watch the scene with focused intensity. Submerged in the water, Mariabelle discovers that she can breathe perfectly fine. The mermaid pulls her deeper into the swirling blue abyss. She warns the princess that they have very little time remaining for their task. Mariabelle marvels at the bubbles rising around her as she explores the depths. They swim past a giant whale in a sunken palace hidden beneath the sea. Mariabelle arrives at a grand, sunlit underwater hall that sparkles with light. The mermaid leads Mariabelle into the presence of her sovereign. They arrive before the water spirit queen, who sits regally upon her underwater throne. The queen acknowledges that the mermaid has successfully brought the guest she requested. Welcoming the pink-haired princess, the queen remarks that Mariabelle seems far too modest for a member of royalty. She pointedly asks if the girl is still being haunted by the memories of her past life. The queen explains that while she won't cast blame, such excessive modesty is currently hindering Mariabelle from revealing her true skills. Maribel quietly accepts the observation as the queen expresses her approval. The conversation turns toward a more urgent matter as the queen brings up the topic of the poison. She reveals her suspicion that a water fairy is involved, noting that simply cleansing the body of toxins will not be enough to save the victims. The revelation that fairies helped facilitate the poisoning leaves a heavy question regarding who is responsible and how they bypassed palace security. Acting as the water spirit queen, she takes responsibility for the situation and offers a cup of healing water. She explains that this sacred liquid is centuries old and possesses unique properties capable of cleansing the most stubborn poisons. A single glowing drop of green liquid sits at the bottom of the ornate chalice. When Mariabelle worries that it won't be enough for everyone, the queen instructs her to use her own magic to increase the volume of the water. The princess stares at the cup in deep thought while the mermaid sovereign watches from her throne. Maribel looks up with a start as she realizes the weight of the task ahead of her. The water spirit queen lets out a weary sigh, looking slightly drained by the interaction. She warns the princess not to misunderstand, stating that the interests of fairies are always taken for granted. Mariabelle argues back, insisting that the fairies she knows have always been kind and have never abandoned her in times of trouble. The queen suddenly erupts into a fit of boisterous laughter, leaving the young princess looking completely baffled. She cryptically remarks that not all fairies are cute creatures and that they always find a way to get exactly what they want. A terrifying grin spreads across the queen's face as she leans in close, terrifying Maribel before telling her to go and help the victims. Maribel is suddenly swept up in a rushing current of water as the queen tells her that her strength will be useful to them in the future. A lingering doubt about her own usefulness to the fairies echoes in the darkness. Her consciousness begins to return as a voice frantically calls out her name. Back in the palace, King Malik and the queen look on in a panic as a fairy flies around them. The ballroom floor is a scene of absolute misery, with many guests lying unconscious amidst the chaos. King Malik holds his daughter tightly as she finally returns from her underwater vision. A soft, quick gasp sounds as the princess's eyes snaps open, her consciousness snapping back into the present. Mariabelle looks up at her father with a determined expression, clutching the chalice from the dream. She resolves to put the lessons she learned from Master Crawley into practice immediately. A low, steady hum fills the air as Malik supports his daughter while she prepares to cast her spell. Mariabelle focuses her mind, realizing she needs to gather as much magical energy as possible to save everyone. Her father watches with an expression of stunned concern as his young daughter begins to glow with power. She reflects on the 12 long years she has spent studying the secrets of magic. Memories of her past life and her struggles fuel her desire to protect those she loves now. Clutching the cup to her chest, she acknowledges that she has finally learned how to wield her magic effectively. A flashback shows Master Crawley teaching a younger Mariabelle about the deep connection between spirit and power. He explained that magical and spiritual powers are essentially manifestations of the same singular force. Maribel concludes that there is no inherent good or evil in magic itself. She declares her intention to use her power exactly as she pleases, while a yellow fairy watches in surprise. Fairies of all colors flutter around the room, mesmerized by the massive surge of energy the princess is producing. Maribel focuses her entire being on the chalice, her face set in a mask of intense concentration. A loud, wet splash sounds as the cup suddenly overflows with a torrent of glowing, magical water. The massive exertion leaves the princess staggering, her strength nearly spent as the king catches her. Looking toward her father, she urgently tells him to use the water to save the people on the floor. The queen kneels by Randy's side and begins to pour the enchanted liquid into his mouth. Across the room, other guests are finally given the antidote as the palace staff works frantically. Mariabelle clasps her hands together in a silent prayer, watching for any sign of her brother's recovery. Randy's eyes slowly flutter open, looking weary but alive as he gazes up at his sister. Princess Mariabelle, King Malik, and the queen cry out in relief for the recovering Randy. The ballroom remains a chaotic scene of suffering as many guests lie unconscious. Fairies rush through the palace hallways with a sudden, sharp gasp sounding.
The fairies announce that they have finally located the target of their search.
The fairies urgently question what has happened to the woman they found, wondering if they should try to catch her.
A maid lies slumped over a table, having met a tragic end as someone cries out in shock.
The maid's lifeless form sits amidst the evidence of the poisoning.
A realization dawns that things are not as they seem, punctuated by a sense of disbelief.
A grim confirmation reveals that the maid responsible for the poisoning is dead. The warning lingers that her mysterious partner remains at large while Maribel stands amongst the guests. Maribel tries to maintain appearances while surrounded by grateful and happy guests. She hides her internal turmoil behind a forced smile and a bead of nervous sweat. A noblewoman in a red dress watches the princess from afar with a suspicious and cold gaze. The palace fountain glitters under the peaceful moonlight. Seeking solitude, the pink-haired princess sighs heavily as she walks alone through the gardens. Despite the tragedy, she reflects that the royal event continued at its usual pace. Maribel recalls the moment the maid served the tray of suspicious pink drinks. She realizes with horror that the poison was intended for her, and she feels responsible for the suffering of others. A sudden movement near the fountain catches her attention. She spots the black-haired boy standing with his massive flaming wolf as a soft gasp escapes her. The boy watches her silently with his crimson eyes before turning to leave the garden. Desperate for answers, she runs forward and catches his sleeve, begging him to wait. He pauses, looking back at her with a cold and unreadable expression. Maribel stares at him with eyes full of intense determination. The yellow fairy bravely confronts the giant beast, daring it to try and bark. The small creature bristles with unexpected courage and fury. Tension thickens as the princess refuses to let the boy walk away without answering. The stars shine over the princess as the title reveals her decision to take revenge. She holds tight to his arm, unwilling to let this mysterious boy go. The boy observes the strange girl, wondering about her presence amidst the blooming flowers. Flustered, Maribel apologizes profusely for her sudden and bold actions. She panics as the wolf playfully snaps at her fairy friend, but Will assures her he is all right. The boy offers a rare moment of gentleness as he pets his massive companion. He coldly asks what she could possibly want from him. Clutching a handkerchief, she declares her desire to speak with him. She insists that she can prove his innocence to the rest of the kingdom, knowing he was not involved. He warns her that associating with him will only bring her hatred, but she demands to know more about him. Turning his back, he remarks that creatures like himself have nothing to teach humans. The woman in the red dress watches their secret meeting from the shadows of the trees. She notes that the princess is meeting with a mysterious figure under the cover of night. Maribel questions him about the legend of the black dog that supposedly took him as a child. The boy glares back at her with a sharp and menacing look. The yellow fairy clarifies that being raised by a black dog is likely a metaphor. A legendary tale describes a farmer who once danced with fairies for a night that lasted years. The story serves as a reminder that fairy time moves differently than human time. The farmer's return to a changed world is a famous story in the kingdom of Illit. She wonders if the mythical black dog was what actually guided him home. He remains silent, knowing the black dog is viewed only as an ominous symbol of death. Maribel takes his hands, sharing that her own magical abilities once made her feel like an outcast. She tells him that no power is truly evil, and his past does not define the person he is now. The massive black wolf gives a low, rhythmic sniff against the princess's hand. Maribel gently strokes the creature's dark fur, causing it to lean into her touch. Under the watchful eye of the black-haired boy, the princess finds wonder in the giant beast's calm demeanor. The boy reflects on how he once viewed fairies as unkind, yet they managed to save everyone today. Maribel looks up with a wide-eyed expression of realization. Flying nearby, the yellow fairy loudly disputes the princess's assumptions. As she holds her tiny friend, Maribel dismisses the fairy's warnings about the boy bringing bad luck. The black-haired boy remains stoic, his gaze shifting slightly downward. He casually pinches the fairy's dress, remarking that the one who originally took him is long gone. Will flails her arms in a panic, demanding that the boy release her immediately. He ponders the heavy burden of being a sacrifice and reveals he no longer blames his kidnapper. A look of shimmering awe fills the princess's bright blue eyes. Standing near the moonlit gazebo, the boy questions her knowledge of poisons and mentions sensing a fairy's involvement. He suggests some fairies might act for humanitarian reasons and expresses his intent to investigate the matter further. His red eyes narrow as he mentions his missing brothers, while a vision of a child among wolves appears. Startled by the dark revelation, Mariabelle stares at the boy and his formidable flaming companion. The princess turns her attention back to the glowing yellow fairy hovering before her. Amidst a cluster of sparkling blue roses, a silent hope for a future meeting lingers in the air. The black-haired boy extends his hand, proposing that he and the princess become friends from this point forward. Mariabelle eagerly accepts his hand, expressing her genuine happiness at making his acquaintance. A radiant, joyful smile breaks across the princess's face as she celebrates her new friendship. Her laughter fills the garden, leaving the boy looking slightly perplexed yet amused by her enthusiasm. Under the starry night sky, the two new friends stand together by the ornate gazebo. Randy comes running through the palace gardens, frantically shouting his sister's name. A sharp question pierces the night, demanding to know what she is doing out so late. Randy rushes to his sister's side while she calmly explains she was just conversing with a friend. A knowing, subtle smile plays across the black-haired boy's face. He confirms his identity and his brief conversation with the princess to the approaching noble. Mariabelle is struck with shock as the boy politely greets Randy with a confident grin. She begins to wonder if this mysterious boy is actually meant to be her brother's subordinate. The trio stands in the garden, framed by the massive, flaming presence of the Black Wolf. Randy admits he was informed about the boy's arrival, though the Duke's family was vague about his background. The black-haired boy remains distant, stating that the final decision regarding his placement has already been made. He reveals his father wants him gone, and Randy accuses him of only accepting the role to be near Mariabelle. The boy offers a cold, unreadable stare in response to the accusation. Mariabelle bursts into laughter at the suggestion, while Will, hovering nearby, shares her disbelief at Randy's theory. The three figures stand in a tense standoff on the palace lawn as the night deepens. The noblewoman in the red dress flees the scene in a state of high-strung panic. She catches her breath and begins relaying what she witnessed to a man in a maroon suit. The man expresses his disdain, wishing the fairies had killed the boy and questioning the royal family's support. Suggesting they need the knight's assistance, the man in the blue cloak vows to handle the situation personally. The scene shifts to the palace interior where Master Crawley watches over the princess. Sitting cross-legged on the floor, Mariabelle centers herself and begins a deep meditation. The green-haired teacher stands by silently as Will flutters around the focused princess. Mariabelle visualizes the flow of magic, concentrating on gathering energy particles into a single point. A formal confirmation states that Alan will indeed begin serving as Randy's subordinate. She reflects on her father's desire for Alan to adapt to society using his unique fairy contract. Randy and Alan enter the room together, ready to begin their duties. Sudden black energy crackles violently around Mariabelle, causing Will to scream out for help in terror. Master Crowley rushes forward to grab Mariabelle's hands as the dangerous magical discharge intensifies. Mr. Crawley wipes sweat from his brow, warning Mariabelle that suddenly interrupting her meditation was dangerous and she must learn to control her tremendous magical power. Mariabelle quietly acknowledges her teacher's warning as Randy's arrival is heralded by a sudden apology for interrupting her training. Mariabelle looks up with wide, startled eyes, quickly insisting that her brother's arrival did not interrupt her session. Randy and Alan stand side by side in their formal attire, ready for their upcoming patrol. The pink-haired princess watches them curiously, wondering if they are preparing to leave. Randy apologetically informs his sister that she will likely have to attend the upcoming tea party by herself. The blonde-haired prince explains that their duties require them to patrol the kingdom's borders. Mariabelle and Will discuss the potential return of a monster, questioning how it could reappear after her father dealt with it years ago, while Alan asks for confirmation. Alan watches her with a sharp, crimson-eyed gaze. Seeking his own answers, Alan turns away and states his resolve to accompany Randy on the border patrol. Desperate to help, Mariabelle grabs her brother and begs to join them, insisting her magic and spiritual powers could be useful against the monster. Randy recoils in utter shock, flatly refusing her request as an impossibility while their teacher and fairy friend watch from afar. Alan leads the way on horseback, riding past a moving carriage through the town streets. Having successfully negotiated her way onto the mission, Mariabelle sits inside the carriage, reflecting on her journey to the borders despite Randy's initial refusal. Randy sits across from her, staring out the window in sullen silence. Maribel notes that her brother remains visibly upset by her presence. Randy sets strict conditions for her safety, demanding she never leave his sight and retreat into the wagon at the first sign of danger. He further emphasizes that she must immediately inform him if she begins to feel unwell. Maribel giggles at her brother's overprotectiveness, lightly teasing him for his concern. A sudden, violent jolt rocks the carriage, sending Maribel tumbling as Randy cries out her name in alarm. Randy moves quickly to catch a sister, shielding her as the carriage comes to a rough stop. Shaken by the impact, Maribel looks up at her brother with a startled expression. Bright light pours through the carriage door as Maribel looks out in dawning horror. Outside, a multi-eyed, snarling beast looms, while the rhythmic clashing of steel reaches Maribel's ears. Realizing they have been ambushed by a monster, Maribel calls out as Randy leaps from the carriage into the fray. Randy turns back with a fierce, protective glare, ordering Maribel to stay put until he gives the word. The carriage door slams shut, leaving the worried princess and her fairy friend waiting in the dim interior. Listening to the sounds of combat, Maribel realizes the clashing sounds aren't coming from the monster, but from a fight between humans. Will hovers nearby, her expression tightening with concern. A sudden, sharp realization strikes Maribel as she senses something unexpected. Will's attention is drawn to a small, glowing chest that has begun to manifest nearby. The monster's presence becomes overwhelming as Maribel stares out at the chaos. Outside, a group of cloaked assassins and knights have surrounded the royal carriage with drawn blades. Maribel clasps her hands together in prayer, her face pale with dread as Will tries to comfort her. The scene erupts into a chaotic battle as the knights clash with the mysterious, masked attackers. Randy fights with fierce determination, his eyes focused on the enemies before him. Randy's blade meets the steel of a masked assassin as the battle intensifies. Randy realizes with a cold sweat that their opponents possess unexpected strength. Surrounded on all sides by masked foes, Alan and Randy stand back to back, ready to defend the carriage. Alan's crimson eyes narrow as he spots a dark, malevolent spirit manifesting amidst the combat. From inside the carriage, Maribel watches as the two warriors brace themselves against the growing darkness. Alan recoils in disbelief as one of the assassins blows into a small whistle, signaling a change in the battle. Terror spreads through the area as the massive, multi-eyed monster is suddenly summoned into the middle of the skirmish. Facing the overwhelming beast, both Alan and Randy prepare for the most dangerous fight of their lives. The knights are thrown into disarray as they struggle to fend off both the assassins and the beast. Alan and Randy remain united, their weapons raised against the encroaching nightmare. With a courageous roar, Alan charges forward, thrusting his sword directly into the monster's gaping maw. Randy shouts a desperate warning as Alan finds himself dangerously close to the beast's lethal fangs. Alan grinds his teeth, shouting for the others to retreat while he holds the monster back. The massive creature snaps at Alan, its sharp teeth and crushing weight threatening to overwhelm him in a single strike. Will's eyes widen as a faint sound breaks the silence. Maribel senses the presence of more fairies nearby. Looking through the carriage window, the princess recalls a previous monster attack on her father. A memory of her past inability to control magic surfaces amidst danger. A vision of her younger, sickly self underscores her past struggles. Determined, Maribel grips her chest and prepares to act. She remembers her green-haired teacher guiding her through early magical studies. The princess recalls quiet days spent reading in flower-filled fields. Together with Will, she once studied spiritual elements within nature. Joyful memories of playing in the forest with her fairy friend flash by. Breaking her promise, Maribel leaps out and shouts for Randy and Alan. She watches in terror as Alan confronts the massive, many-eyed beast. The terrifying monster growls, its multiple red eyes fixed on its prey. A sudden shockwave erupts as Randy rushes to join the desperate battle. Both Alan and Randy demand that Maribel return to the safety of the wagon. The image of the creature's gaping maw is reflected in Maribel's eye. Chasing away her fear, the princess activates a brilliant burst of golden magic. Maribel conjures a glowing shield directly inside the monster's wide-open mouth. A sudden crack resounds as the princess falls back with a pained ack. Randy seizes the opening, leaping high to deliver a powerful overhead strike. Blood sprays as the prince's blade carves deep into the falling monster. Randy stands over the defeated beast as the life fades from its eyes. Alan supports the trembling princess while they survey the scene together. Maribel's breath catches as she notices a bizarre transformation occurring. Looking toward Alan, the princess asks a confused question about the situation. The group stares in shock at the monster's corpse lying in the road. Maribel realizes the beast has reverted into the form of a black puppy.
Randy rushes forward to check if the princess is all right.
The princess remains stunned, her eyes wide with lingering fear.
Randy kneels to speak with his sister as knights gather around them.
A disciplined line of armored knights stands ready for further orders. The blonde knight observes the aftermath with a cold, analytical gaze.
Alan stands over the small black corpse, his expression unreadable.
The blonde knight stares down at the ground in silent contemplation.
Randy notes that the attackers moved with the precision of well-trained soldiers.
The mysterious assassins lie bound and defeated on the forest floor.
Randy suspects the scouts were sent by the Wood Kingdom. Alan looks up at the bright sun with a grim expression.
The blonde knight rudely presses his boot against the puppy's lifeless body. Alan's gaze hardens as he watches the knight's disrespectful action. He looks away, struggling to contain his growing anger. The other knights watch the tense exchange in silence. A sharp sound echoes as the knight grinds his boot into the corpse. Alan releases a sudden, furious roar that startles everyone nearby. The black-haired boy glares at his companions with pure, unrestrained rage. Alan fiercely demands that the knight remove his dirty feet from the puppy. The royal carriage stands abandoned on the blood-stained forest pass. Inside, Maribel and Will share a moment of tense apprehension. The knights gather in a circle, their attention fixed on the ground. Maribel pulls back the curtain, wondering what is happening outside.
Randy watches from the sidelines as Maribel runs toward the clearing where the confrontation is unfolding.
The pink-haired princess arrives at the scene just as the tension between Alan and the knights reaches a breaking point. The blonde, purple-eyed knight points his blade at the boy and directly accuses him of betraying their country. Maribel recoils in sheer disbelief, her hand flying to her mouth as the word traitor echoes through the air. Alan's crimson eyes narrow with a cold, lethal intensity as his patience finally snaps. A colossal black wolf spirit with glowing red eyes manifests behind Alan, looming over the entire clearing with a low growl. The blonde knight remains unfazed, taunting the boy to fight and prove his true nature. His gloved hand tightens with a quick, leather-creaking grip around the hilt of his curved sword. With a sudden, explosive movement, the knight lunges forward to deliver a lethal strike. Alan releases a thunderous, unrestrained roar that shakes the very trees, demanding the knight stop. The knight's blade is caught by the massive, snarling jaws of the dark wolf spirit as a sharp, metallic clatter sounds. A malicious, triumphant smirk spreads across the knight's face as he claims the boy has finally revealed his monster side. The knight braces himself, holding his ground against the snapping fangs of the massive shadow beast. He stands ready as his fellow knights gather behind him, their blades drawn and ready for a coordinated assault. The scene erupts into motion as the soldiers charge forward, their white capes fluttering in the wind. Alan stands amidst the chaos, guarded by the towering presence of the monstrous black wolf. The blonde knight shouts to his men that they are left with no other choice but to eliminate the threat. He commands the knights to close in and seize whatever the boy is protecting. Maribel watches the violence erupt with wide, tear-filled eyes as Will hovers protectively near her face. The princess whispers Alan's name in a trembling breath, her face pale with dread for her friend. Deep within the undergrowth, several small forest spirits with leaf-like hair watch the battle with wide, curious eyes. The tranquil forest background stands in sharp contrast to the aggressive pursuit occurring on the path below. Alan and his massive guardian remain locked in a tense standoff as the royal guard surrounds them. Realizing the danger, Alan suddenly turns and sprints away, a quick dash sounding as the knight declares him a fugitive. Maribel cries out in a desperate, cracking voice as she watches the knights give chase. Randy rushes to his sister's side, his expression tight with concern as he tries to keep her from following. The princess grabs her brother's arm, begging him to listen and stop the soldiers before someone gets hurt. She insists with growing desperation that they must do something to help Alan. Randy remains silent for a long moment, his blue eyes distant as he weighs his duty against his sister's pleas.
Maribel looks up at him with a pleading expression, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears.
Randy explains that the monster was undeniably a summon from the hostile Wood Kingdom. He argues that Alan's connection to such a beast makes interrogation mandatory, despite Maribel's insistence that he was coerced. The prince questions his sister's blind faith, reminding her that even the fairies once branded the boy as a sacrificial child. He presents a grim theory that Alan might be seeking revenge on the fairies for the hardships he endured in the human world. Randy further notes that even the poison used at her birthday party was linked to fairy magic, casting more doubt on Alan's intentions. Maribel turns to her fairy friend, asking if Will can find any way to use her spiritual powers to clear Alan's name. Will lowers her head in a solemn, quiet gesture, appearing burdened by the weight of the request. The Golden Fairy explains that their kind usually remains isolated within their own elemental circles. She adds that different fairy tribes rarely interact except during exceptionally rare events, like the birth of a special child. Maribel stands in somber silence, her gaze falling to the forest floor as she contemplates the deepening mystery. A sudden, sharp shout from the woods announces that one of the scouts has located their target. The lead knight commands his men to arrest Alan immediately, authorizing the use of weapons if he resists. Maribel suddenly breaks away and sprints into the thicket, ignoring her brother's command to stop. A violent, sudden gust of wind howls through the trees, sending leaves swirling and forcing the knights to shield their eyes. Will notes with a sharp, focused gaze that this powerful energy is emanating from deeper within the forest. The armored soldiers struggle against the buffeting gale as they are ordered to fan out and search everywhere. Randy shouts a final order to his men, reminding them that protecting Maribel must be their primary mission. Separated from the others, the princess wanders through the sun-dappled woods, calling out for her fairy friend. Small tree-like spirits peer down from the high branches, watching the lone girl with silent, unblinking eyes. Maribel pauses, a soft rustle sounding in the leaves as she senses she is no longer alone in the woods. The pink-haired princess stands alone in the quiet, sun-dappled forest. A sudden pop sounds as Will appears, startling Maribel by urgently shouting her name. Maribel looks back with a start, relieved to see her golden fairy companion. The princess laments Alan's apparent deception and expresses deep regret over her broken promise to protect him. Will takes a firm, authoritative stance as she prepares to guide the princess. Inspired by the fairy, Maribel shouts her agreement and rushes deeper into the forest toward a brilliant light. Metal clashes as Alan defends himself against a coordinated assault by the royal knights. The blonde knight grinds his teeth and furiously calls Alan a monster. Alan stands defiant with his wolf guardian amidst several defeated soldiers lying on the ground. Alan's gaze remains cold and focused as the blonde knight orders his men to prepare for an all-out attack. A loud command rings out for everyone to strike the boys simultaneously. A low growl vibrates through the clearing as the wolf braces for the coming charge. The knight shouts a challenge while Alan readies his sword for the next clash. Maribel bursts into the clearing, her eyes wide with terror at the erupting violence. Alan looks back in alarm just as the blonde knight launches a lethal lunging strike. A sickening slice sounds as Alan is struck, sending blood spraying before Maribel's horrified eyes. The princess screams in shock, her face pale as she watches her friend being wounded. Alan's crimson eye dilates with pain and exhaustion as he struggles to maintain his defense. The massive black wolf guardian stands its ground, protectively shielding its master from the surrounding knights. Ignoring the danger, Maribel sprints directly into the center of the deadly confrontation. A quick "bwah" sounds as the princess throws herself between the knight's blade and the injured boy. The blonde knight recoils in shock, barely halting his swing before it can harm the princess. The knight shouts for Maribel to stay away from the dangerous fugitive. To Maribel, the knights appear as swirling, dark shadows devoid of any humanity. She realizes with growing dread that these knights are actively trying to murder their own master's son. Will's urgent warning causes Maribel to gasp in confusion at the unfolding situation. The Golden Fairy hovers close, her expression urgent as she clarifies the true nature of the attackers. Maribel recalls her lessons, noting that different fairy tribes almost never work together, except in dire circumstances. Before she can react, Alan scoops the princess up into his arms to protect her. Maribel lets out a surprised "ee" as Alan insists they move to a safer location to discuss the truth. The black-haired boy looks toward the forest edge with a grim and resolute expression. The blonde knight watches in powerless fury as the boy prepares to flee with the princess. A rapid dash sounds as Alan sprints into the dense trees, disappearing from the clearing with Maribel. Randy is left in a state of shock, his mind reeling as a shout announces the princess has been kidnapped. The blonde knight turns toward Randy, reporting the boy's escape with the captive princess. A plea for forgiveness sounds as the knights claim Alan has vanished into the woods. While Randy struggles to accept the news, a sinister, toothy smirk briefly flashes across the knight's face. The prince bellows Maribel's name, his voice echoing fruitlessly through the thick trees. The search party looks into the deep woods, realizing the targets have completely vanished. A soft rustle sounds as Alan carries the princess through the sunlit thicket. Maribel rests her head against Alan's chest, her eyes closed as she remains unconscious in his arms.
The forest swallows them whole, leaving no visible trace of their passage for the knights to follow.
A magical shimmer emanates from a footprint, causing vines to sprout with a quick zip. A massive wall of flowering vines rapidly grows to seal off the forest path behind them. Green forest spirits manifest around the new barrier, ensuring the pursuing knights are kept at bay. The woods return to a deceptive peace as the sunlight filters through the dense canopy. The royal scouts follow the trail, certain they are closing in on the fugitives. A sudden stop sounds as the leading knight's boots hit the dirt in front of the blocked path. The soldiers stare in bewilderment at the wall of impenetrable thorns that has suddenly appeared. The blonde knight reports the strange obstacle to Prince Randy as their trail goes cold. A knight in silver armor kneels before Prince Randy, reporting that they have lost the trail of the fugitive. Randy demands to know how Alan could leave no trace, as the knight explains the footprints vanished into a wall of thorns deep in the forest. The prince grits his teeth in a pained expression, while his guards restrain him, warning that he will get lost if he ventures further. Randy cries out in anguish, blaming himself for failing to protect Mariabelle from being kidnapped. He regrets bringing her along, lamenting that she would have been safe if he had left her at the palace. The prince stares blankly into the distance with wide, watery eyes, overwhelmed by guilt for his sister. A loud shout rings out as Randy charges into the woods, ignoring the desperate calls of his knights to wait. The sandy-haired knight watches the prince's departure with a cold, detached expression. A quick zah sounds as the knight leads his men into the thicket to follow their headstrong master. Far away from the chaos, a massive, ancient tree stands in a peaceful, sun-drenched clearing. Several small, yellow-clothed forest spirits hide among the bright flowers, watching the clearing with wide eyes. Mariabelle lies unconscious on the soft grass beneath the shade of the towering tree. A soft potch sounds as the pink-haired princess slowly opens her eyes, her gaze blurry and unfocused. She sits up with a groggy, and rubs the sleep from her eyes while trying to remember where she is. The princess suddenly recalls that it was Alan who carried her through the woods to this hidden spot. She remembers waking up briefly to see Alan and Will watching over her before she drifted back into a deep sleep. Mariabelle questions what happened during her slumber, her expression filling with alarm as she notices her friends are gone. She sits beneath the massive tree, looking around the vibrant meadow with confusion. The princess gazes up at the sky, watching the sunlight filter through the dense canopy above. Standing up, Mariabelle calls out to ask if anyone is nearby, her voice echoing through the quiet woods. She gasps in surprise and lets out a loud, "Huh?" as she discovers her companions high above. High on the trunk, Alan and Will are trapped within the thick, coiling roots of the ancient tree. Mariabelle cries out their names in terror, demanding to know why the tree has captured her friends. She reaches toward the rough bark as a mocking laugh echoes from above, and a branch cracks sharply. A quick rustle sounds as the leaves shake, revealing a figure moving through the upper branches. A tan-skinned, blonde-haired fairy named Uruk sits casually on a branch, telling Mariabelle that a little girl like her is helpless. The princess looks up in shock, realizing she is face-to-face with a forest fairy. Uruk glides down to a lower branch as Mariabelle pleads with him to release her friends, while he remarks on their strength. The fairy leans forward with a curious expression, taken aback by the girl's bold request. Mariabelle looks back in confusion, sensing another presence entering the clearing. A white shot reveals the meadow is bordered by a green, ornate curtain as a tall woman steps into view. A beautiful fairy with long brown hair and a green dress stands with her eyes closed in a serene gesture. The woman introduces herself as the forest fairy Buna and identifies the boy on the branch as her assistant, Uruk. Buna continues her introduction as Mariabelle wonders how to behave toward the beings who kidnapped her friends. The princess warns them that taking children as sacrifices is a grave sin, her voice trembling with righteous anger. Buna listens with a calm, stoic expression, her green eyes fixed on the determined princess. Uruk gestures toward the trapped boy, asking why she thinks they are the ones who started kidnapping children. The three stand in a tense standoff within the sunlit clearing, surrounded by blooming flowers. Buna watches the girl with a slight, knowing smile, appearing unbothered by her accusations. A sudden gasp sounds as Mariabelle realizes these fairies might hold the key to a darker mystery. The princess looks up at the forest fairy with wide, desperate eyes. She wonders if these spirits know what happened to Alan's brother and why fairies themselves are being taken. Buna and Uruk exchange a look as the girl continues to push for answers and her friend's freedom. A speech bubble appears as Buna asks the princess to explain why she is so insistent.
Maribel begs the fairies once more to release her friends, her hand pressed to her chest in a sincere plea.
A series of ha sounds echo as Uruk laughs at the girl's small size and apparent weakness. He mockingly asks how a mere brat like her could possibly help them or change their minds. Maribel falls silent for a moment, her gaze dropping to the grass as she absorbs the fairy's insult.
Buna offers a small challenge, stating that if the girl is confident in her abilities, no one will stop her from trying.
The princess looks toward the woods as Buna suggests others might help, drawing a surprised "ah" from the girl.
The brown-haired fairy looks on gently with a calm expression.
She explains that finding information is difficult because they rarely communicate with representatives of other elemental spirits. A soft rustling sound accompanies the fairy as she points Maribel toward the base of a massive tree.
A small fairy lies peacefully, encased within the solid bark of the giant tree trunk.
Maribel confidently declares she will attempt to help, citing her lifelong familiarity with fairykind.
A gentle hand rests on the princess's head as the elder fairy offers her silent encouragement.
Prince Randy and the muscular male fairy watch the exchange with quiet interest.
The elder fairy explains that they value their home and are not accustomed to interfering with the affairs of foreign lands.
Maribel looks back over her shoulder, feeling the weight of the task ahead as she hesitates. The brown-haired fairy leans down with a warm, supportive smile for the young princess. She encourages Maribel, suggesting she may find the answer she seeks in that direction. Maribel bows deeply in gratitude, promising to give the mission her absolute best effort. The fairy closes her eyes with a serene and contented smile. A quick ta sounds as Maribel begins to run while the spirits watch her departure from the tree. The muscular blonde fairy stares after her with a look of mild surprise and curiosity. The brown-haired fairy watches peacefully from the side as the wind rustles the leaves. The two forest spirits remain together by the tree as the sounds of the woods echo around them. A tiny, yellow-garbed fairy gasps in shock as she is suddenly startled by a movement in the flowers. A small hand tightens into a fist as a soft "gew" sounds in a moment of silent resolve.
The small yellow spirit takes flight, leaving a trail of sparkles over the blooming yellow flowers.
Maribel races through the sun-drenched forest while a memory of her brother and the fairies fills her mind. The small yellow fairy flies past the tree where Alan remains trapped as the forest guardians look on. Randy and his royal knights reach a wall of dense, magical vines and brambles in the middle of the woods. The blonde prince looks concerned as he notes the path is blocked by dirt and they cannot proceed. A mysterious, glowing footprint illuminates the dark ground near the base of the thick vines. Randy wonders if fairies are behind the magic, while a sharp sound echoes as he cuts through the wall with his sword. With renewed determination, the prince urges his knights to keep moving forward into the dense foliage. Maribel pauses to catch her breath while resting her hands on her knees near a large rock. The princess prepares herself for the next challenge, saying it is time to proceed with the mission. A relieved "pew" sounds as Maribel stops to admire the beautiful, glowing forest lights. Maribel notes with growing concern that she hasn't encountered a single fairy since her arrival in this part of the woods. She peers cautiously around the side of a large tree trunk, looking for any sign of life.
A look of sudden realization and surprise crosses Maribel's face.
The soft glow of the woods reflects in her eyes as she moves toward a hidden clearing. An excited "oh" sounds as Maribel discovers a group of tiny mushroom fairies hiding behind giant blue fungi. The princess watches the small creatures with a mixture of wonder and curiosity. She softly promises not to cause them any harm while apologizing for frightening them. A tiny spirit peers shyly over the edge of a mushroom cap, watching the human girl. Maribel asks if they have any information regarding the missing fairy she is searching for. The little fairy slowly emerges from its hiding spot, looking curiously at the pink-haired princess. A dark vision reveals that sorcerers, who are widely hated and hidden in towers, may be kidnapping fairies.
One of the tiny mushroom spirits hops down to get a better look at Maribel while leaving a trail of light.
Maribel ponders the horrifying possibility of a sorcerer kidnapping the fairies to steal their power. She decides that Professor Crowley might be the best person to consult for more answers. A quick "ta" sounds as Maribel runs off, remembering the fairy's advice to head for the river if trouble arises. Randy looks back over his shoulder as he and his knights continue their search through the woods. A brilliant, glowing gateway of light appears between the trees in the distance. Randy is horrified to find Alan trapped and unconscious within a cluster of thick, dark tree roots. The prince screams Alan's name as the massive roots suddenly come to life and lash out at him. The muscular fairy looks on with a smirk, expressing surprise that a human managed to travel so far into their domain. Prince Randy charges forward with a glowing sword. Prince Randy shouts for them to release Alan. Buna warns that the prince is infusing his sword with spirit power as Randy demands to know Maribel's location, recalling the legends of powerful fairies in this domain. A sharp clash sounds as Randy leaps through the air and slashes at the encroaching tree roots with his magically charged blade. Uruk notes Randy's fairy heritage as Buna cautions that killing them will hide the girl's location, causing the prince to tighten his grip. Randy looks up with fierce, glowing eyes while asking what they did to his sister as Alan watches from below. A massive crash sounds as a giant black wolf steps between the combatants, prompting Uruk to order it to stop as Randy gasps in recognition of the legendary black dog. The black dog makes for one intimidating bodyguard. A low growl sounds as the massive beast protects Alan, who leans against a tree trunk in the background. Buna suggests the black dog might be helping because raising a human child has taught it the depth of a mother's feelings. The giant wolf remains silent while sitting in the center of the flowery meadow. Uruk mocks the idea of a beast understanding human love, but the wolf growls that its own children were stolen by humans. The wolf explains that Alan returned to the human world to help find its missing children, while Randy realizes that Alan sought his family despite being treated like a monster. Maribel wakes up in the forest and spots a beautiful white horse standing near a river. The princess marvels at the beauty of the horse fairy and wonders about its identity. A soft groan sounds as Will slowly wakes up among the yellow flowers. Will takes flight over the vibrant meadow. Randy and Alan reunite with the golden fairy in the sun-drenched clearing. Alan looks on with a serious and contemplative expression. Buna insists they must pursue the princess immediately. Will quickly agrees to the urgente. The forest fairy reveals that Maribel headed toward the river at the kingdom's border. Will is horrified that the girl was left alone near the river, but Buna cruelly laughs that a child who can't handle a kelpie is useless to them. Alan and Will dash through the forest. Randy grabs Alan's shoulder and insists they move immediately after the boy reacts in shock to the news. A sharp tug sounds as Randy explains that the kelpie is a predatory fairy that preys on children. Maribel approaches the tranquil river where several white horses are grazing in the sunlight. The princess excitedly wonders if the creature is a horse fairy or perhaps a unicorn. Maribel gently reaches out to touch the snout of the beautiful white creature. A quick dash sounds as the search party sprints toward the river with a black dog following close behind. Randy asks if the kelpie is truly as dangerous as they say. Will confirms the danger while the soldiers admit they are unable to see the fairies. Alan explains that the kelpie is an aquatic fairy that takes the form of a beautiful horse or person to lure victims. He warns that the kelpie drowns and devours unsuspecting travelers and children, showing a vision of a sinister, sharp-toothed man behind a mask of beauty. Randy runs desperately toward the river. The prince vows never to forgive the beech tree fairy for putting his innocent sister in such grave danger. Alan somberly reflects that wild fairies can be far more cruel than the ones within the palace walls. A sudden "gyah" sounds as Will indignantly shouts that she isn't that sweet, while Alan recalls being kidnapped by a cruel fairy himself. The black dog recalls the moment it discovered the abandoned boy in the forest. A loud "wah" sounds as the wolf remembers finding baby Alan crying alone after the fairies had vanished, wondering if they were taken just like its own children. A sharp stop sounds as the group reaches a crossroads in the deep woods. Randy proposes they split up to cover both directions of the river, as illustrated by a small map showing their intended paths. The prince explains the meeting point further upstream while Alan listens intently. A rapid dash sounds as Randy searches the riverbank. Alan agrees to the split setch. The party dashes into the deep forest. Maribel pets the white horse's head and asks for its name. The princess beams with joy as she interacts with the graceful creature. Will flies through the forest searching. The golden fairy cries out in relief as she finally spots Maribel standing with the horses by the water. Maribel gently pets the white horse's nose. An excited "whoa" escapes the princess. Maribel climbs onto the horse's back. A frantic "no" sounds from Uruk.
A loud "gyah" sounds as the horse plunges into the river and the princess shouts "what?" in shock.
Maribel panics as she realizes she needs to get off, but her body won't move.
The princess realizes in horror that her feet are stuck to the horse's skin and she can't pull them off. Maribel is dragged underwater by kelpies. Uruk flies away to find out. Maribel realizes that if a creature takes the form of a beautiful horse to lure travelers and drown them, then it's a kelpie.
The princess identifies the predator as a kelpie.
Sinking deep, Maribel tells herself not to panic and remembers she can use her magic shield to drive the beast away. A pained sounds as the princess gasps that she can't breathe while activating her shield under the water.
Prince Randy notices the flying fairy.
Will looks at the approaching Uruk.
A frantic Uruk cries out that a human child is in danger because the kelpie is showing itself to her.
Will realizes the child is Maribel. Randy orders them to hurry because Maribel is in danger. Uruk offers a bottle of pink liquid, prompting Will to ask what it is. The fairy explains that it is a fairy ointment.
Prince Randy ponders the situation silently. The prince realizes that something is on his eyelid.
Randy stands silent before the fairies.
A shocked, "Whoa, a fairy?" sounds as the prince finally sees the spirits clearly.
Randy and his knights stare ahead.
Randy gasps, in sudden realization.
A sharp dash sounds as Randy shouts that he's coming for Maribel. Maribel sinks deeper into the water while struggling to breathe.
Kelpies circle the princess's magic bubble.
Maribel's eyes wide with terror. Sinking deep, the princess struggles. Predatory horses circle the fading shield. Maribel's consciousness begins to slip. A hand reaches for magical reins.
Will cries out, "Undine!" as a water spirit suddenly appears and grabs the kelpie's harness.
Undine commands the princess to pull the reins immediately.
Maribel reaches for the glowing reins.
A pained sounds as the princess is pulled upward through the dark water. A loud sounds as she is dragged toward the surface.
A loud "yeah" sounds as it leaks. Randy watches his sister falling.
A sudden "oh no" sounds as Maribel realizes her foot came loose and she's falling, while Randy and Will shout for her to wait. The princess realizes she is about to plunge into the river.
Randy watches the massive splash.
The mermaid-like Undine carries the unconscious princess out of the water and hands her over to the kneeling Randy. Randy holds his sister and whispers, Maribel, in a low voice.
The prince whispers, "Thank goodness," in release.
Undine remarks that the kelpie is such a troublemaker while watching the horses in the distance.
Randy sighs that the princess is always getting herself into dangerous situations with the fairies.
A groggy sounds as the princess opens her eye. A pained sounds as Randy wakes and Maribel calls for her brother.
Randy asks the girl why she is here.
The prince shouts in confusion at her answer.
Randy hugs her tightly, saying his heart nearly stopped from worry.
Maribel looks on in stunned silence. She whispers, "Brother," while clutching her chest.
Randy warns her never to be so reckless.
He yells about her wandering off alone.
A tearful Maribel listens in silence.
Randy begs her to never do it again. He continues scolding her during their embrace.
Maribel apologizes while gripping Randy's sleeve. Reflecting on her previous life, she vows to protect this caring family. The group gathers by the river. Will, the yellow fairy, greets them.
Maribel notes how close she has become to Will.
She admires the magical, wild woods.
Randy asks for Alan and explains the plan.
Randy points the way forward.
Maribel looks toward the pass.
Randy tells her to speak up if it's hard.
Maribel wonders what has happened to Alan.
Will reassures her that the black dog is guarding him.
Alan walks through the quiet forest. He notes that the massive wolf is missing. He follows the magical trail alone. A blonde-haired man watches him from the trees.
The knight lunges with his sword drawn.
Alan turns at the sudden noise.
A pained huff sounds as Alan is ambushed while alone. The knight readies his bloodied sword.
Maribel runs into the clearing, screaming Alan's name.
The knight turns toward the interruption. Someone cries out to treat Alan's bleeding.
Randy orders his sister to step back. Randy is frozen in shock.
The knight tells the prince to stay back. Randy demands to know what is happening. The knight maintains his cold glare. He lies, claiming Alan and the beast attacked them.
He calls Alan a disgrace to the family.
The massive black dog returns to defend Alan. The wolf calls him scum as the knight continues lying.
Maribel fears that Alan will die soon.
A soft whisper sounds as Will shares a plan.
Maribel gasps as she hears the secret.
Maribel prepares for the coming struggle.
The knight addresses the prince as Lord Randy. He warns Randy not to interfere with family affairs.
Randy defends Alan as his attendant and demands proof.
Maribel demands a stop to the confrontation, surprising Randy as she approaches the group. Maribel asks if Alan and the black dog were truly the aggressors, while the blonde knight and his soldiers confirm the lie. Maribel vows to bring forth other witnesses after the knight's response, just as a cold sensation washes over the soldier's eyes. Randy is astonished as his vision begins to shift. Maribel grins, knowing the fairy ointment is working. Small fairies hover above the soldiers, explaining that the ointment grants vision to those who are normally blind to spirits.
The soldiers stare in disbelief as glowing eyes begin to peer out from the dark forest.
An eek sounds as the soldiers recoil in terror while realizing the forest is teeming with spirits. The spirits emerge from the river, warning that they are constantly watching while a loud wah sounds.
The blonde knight trembles as a skeletal hand reaches for him, hearing that the cries of a monster are a herald of death.
A loud ah sounds as a terrifying giant-toothed creature looms over the knight, causing him to scream in pure agony.
The soldiers collapse in a heap of terror as they are surrounded by royal knights in white armor. Maribel rejoices while Will excitedly points toward the fleeing men.
Fairies celebrate their victory in the sun-drenched woods.
Maribel waves goodbye to her spirit friends near the carriage. The princess reflects on the successful mission, crediting the fairies for their help. Maribel giggles while a soft hee-hee sounds, satisfied with the day's outcome. Maribel notices a golden object on the ground by the carriage. A vision shows a cloaked figure using the golden tool. She wonders if the thieves used a dog whistle. The scene shifts to a quiet room inside the palace. A crackling sound emerges from the fireplace. Randy watches over the sleeping, bandaged Alan while Maribel peers into the room to check on his condition. A nurse tends to Alan while Randy looks on with a soft smile. Randy and Maribel leave the room, agreeing that Alan needs rest tonight. Maribel apologizes for the day's many worries. Randy smiles kindly at his little sister. He pats her head, promising that her family will always support her.
Maribel hugs her brother tightly as a soft "gew" sounds.
She drifts off to sleep with a peaceful smile. Randy tells Maribel it is late and she should go to bed while she happily runs off. The princess sits alone on her massive bed, contemplating the day. She examines the golden dog whistle with Gull. Maribel decides to consult Professor Crowley about the magical properties of the object tomorrow. A yawn escapes as she says goodnight to Will before falling asleep beside the whistle. The mysterious dog whistle sits on the nightstand. Maribel and Will sleep soundly while the moon hangs high above the palace. The scene transitions back to the golden whistle. Alan rests in bed, still unconscious. He dreams of giant black wolves howling at the moon in a dark forest. The sun rises over the palace towers. Professor Crowley works in his lab surrounded by magical equipment. Maribel surprises him, causing him to jump and check. The professor sighs in relief while apologizing for the interruption to her training. Professor Crowley looks thoughtful as he listens to her. Maribel giggles nervously at his reaction. She explains finding the whistle and how it was used to control a beast that turned into a black dog. Crowley examines the artifact, confirming it is indeed a dog whistle. Maribel looks serious as she prepares to discuss her conversation with the forest fairy.
She asks Will to be quiet for a moment before sharing concerning news with the professor.
Professor Crowley explains to Maribel that magicians are generally disliked and often isolate themselves. A vision reveals that hooded figures have been kidnapping fairies by using power stolen from nature.
Maribel listens with a determined and serious expression on her face.
Crowley ponders the situation while Will the fairy hovers near bed. A soft ha sounds as the professor admits he is an outcast who teaches magic in exchange for research funds. A small k sounds as Crowley coughs while reflecting on his life at the palace. He notes that prejudice against his kind has eased slightly because of the princess's presence. Maribel laughs brightly while crediting the professor's brilliant inventions for the change. Will emphasizes a point while standing beside the laboratory's glowing test tubes. A soft light illuminates a quiet corner of the room. Crowley mentions that there is one other unusually powerful magician he remembers from his past. A vision depicts a dark tower and a cloaked figure who was exiled for committing forbidden acts. Will is horrified to hear that the exile conducted cruel experiments on both humans and fairies. Crowley suggests that while the man's whereabouts are unknown, his research notes might still be in the magic tower. He concludes that the exiled magician must have a wealthy benefactor supporting his expensive research. Her hand tightens on her sleeve as a quick "gew" sounds in her resolve. Maribel asks if she can visit the secret tower, and Crowley explains it is accessible to those with magic. Will watches the exchange with a mixture of concern and intensity. The scene shifts as Prince Randy and the Queen flatly refuse Maribel's request to visit the tower. Randy shouts in disbelief at the dangerous idea his sister has proposed. Maribel sits pensively at a table with Will, processing the family's rejection. The Queen presents a platter of invitations, reminding her daughter that attending social events is a royal duty. Maribel looks uneasy as she realizes her schedule is being filled with unwanted parties.
Randy adds that their mother is eager to dress Mirabelle up in elaborate outfits.
The group stands in the garden as Randy seeks confirmation from his mother.
The prince excitedly suggests they begin by hosting their own tea party. Mirabelle looks hesitant while she attempts to protest the sudden plan.
A bandaged Alan stands nearby in the garden, watching the scene with a somber look.
A sudden, heavy gun sounds as Randy and Mirabelle stare in complete shock at the sight of Alan.
Mirabelle hums softly as she ponders her next move with a serious look. The heavy doors of the palace stand ready for a departure. Mirabelle finds Professor Crowley dressed in a travel cloak and calls out to him. A rapid huff sounds as breathless Mirabelle catches up to the professor.
Mirabelle apologizes for sending him alone, but Crowley insists he will head to the magic tower first.
Mirabelle waves goodbye, wishing him luck on his mission to find the missing fairies. A haunting narration suggests that back then, they never thought the professor would never return. A momentary pause occurs as the narrative shifts focus. Professor Crowley sets out toward the distant magic tower to hunt for clues regarding the kidnapped fairies.
Crowley reassures Mirabelle that her magic will grant her entry soon, though she notes she still needs her family's blessing.
The professor offers a small, knowing smile during their final moments together. He pats Mirabelle's head and advises her to cherish her supportive family. Mirabelle beams with a joyful and innocent smile. Walking through the halls, she realizes she must find a way to win over her family while Crowley is away. Gasping in surprise, Mirabelle discovers a room overflowing with colorful and ornate dresses. The queen announces that it is time to choose outfits for the upcoming tea party.
A sharp gun sounds as Mirabelle is caught off guard by the maid's sudden enthusiasm.
Her mother points toward a collection of blue garments for her to try on.
Mirabelle is dressed in a voluminous pink gown, much to her mother's delight.
The next outfit is a bright yellow dress adorned with sunflowers and extra drapes. Finally, she tries on a sophisticated dark blue dress that her mother wants to modify with silver thread. Mirabelle sits while her pink-haired mother and a fairy observe the dress fitting.
Mirabelle gasps in awe at the stunning white gown she is wearing.
She recalls her previous life as a neglected marquis's daughter whose magic made her an outcast. Her past was spent in isolation, wearing old rags until her engagement brought a single new dress. A vision reveals a moment of brief hope before the betrayal of a silver-haired man. A close-up captures a flicker of memory in her current blue eyes. Laughter echoes as a soft hee-hee sounds while the mother and maid enjoy the fitting.
Mirabelle notes her mother's joy as the woman thinks her daughter is adorable in everything.
A warm "Q" sounds as her mother hugs her, mentioning their fairy bloodline. The fairy urges Mirabelle to change as a maid presents yet another dress. Mirabelle is struck with shock, realizing the dress-up session is far from over.
A heavy sounds as she collapses onto a bed, completely worn out.
Randy and a bandaged Alan arrive, with Randy suggesting it is time to let his sister rest. Mirabelle feels relieved until Randy mentions selecting legendary tableware for her tea party. Randy insists they hurry the preparations while Alan stands ready with a clipboard. A quick scribble sounds as they rush off, dragging a protesting Mirabelle to start tasks. The scene transitions to a quiet, elegant corner of the palace. Randy explains he has already finalized the guest list while Mirabelle rests on a sofa. He details selecting specific noble daughters to ensure a good social fit for his sisters. Mirabelle's eyes sparkle as she asks to write the invitations personally, which Randy encourages. She looks at the list, hoping the invited girls will actually attend. Randy explains that their responses will reveal which families are allies or potential enemies. Alan stresses the importance of first impressions, while Randy scolds his rough language. Mirabelle looks determined as she confirms the tea party plans are fully set. The sun shines brightly over the palace on the official day of the tea party. The garden is beautifully decorated with floral arches and elegant seating. Elaborate tea sets and fresh flowers adorn the tables under the clear sky. A guest with a fan arrives, noting that the setup is surprisingly decent. She smirks behind her fan, anticipating some entertainment at the princess's first event. Light clouds drift across the bright blue sky above the palace towers. Golden flowers bloom in the palace gardens near the waiting tea tables. Guests begin walking through the rose-covered archway into the party area. Excitement fills the air as a high-pitched kya kya sounds during the guests' arrival. The woman with the fan watches with a calculating and mischievous expression. She admits to herself that the gathering looks better than she expected. Her gaze sharpens as she prepares for the social interactions ahead.
Maribel stands at the floral entrance, warmly welcoming her guests to the garden. She offers a sweet smile, though a hint of nervousness touches her expression.
A rhythmic ba-dump sounds as she reflects on this being her first ever tea party. She spots Randy peeking from behind a tree and realizes he's secretly watching over her. A soft zzz sounds as palace staff also hide in the bushes to observe the event.
Fairies hover among the flowers, whispering words of encouragement to the princess.
Maribel beams at the group, expressing her wish for everyone to have fun. A sudden, awkward silence follows her greeting, leaving her wondering if she erred.
A pink-haired guest breaks the tension, thanking her and calling the invitation an honor.
A sharp pang sounds as a fan snaps shut while Maribel feels a wave of relief. A lady recalls their last meeting at the princess's birthday, sparking a dark memory. The guests discuss the horrific poisoning incident at the ball, noting Maribel's pale complexion. The lady suggests moving on from gloomy topics as a maid prepares to serve treats. A platter of vibrant, sparkling macarons is presented to the guests. A chorus of kya sounds as the noble guests admire Lady Irene's fashion sense, while Maribel looks on quietly. Hiding behind her fan, Irene notes that her selections will soon be the latest trend in the capital and encourages the others to partake.
Maribel and her guests turn their attention toward the tiered dessert stand laden with treats.
A long, satisfied ha follows a guest's declaration of how delicious the refreshments are. Nervously clutching her hands, Maribel invites the ladies to try the specific desserts she has prepared for them. Irene offers a backhanded compliment, calling the party ordinary but delightful, while stressing that high society must maintain strict standards.
While Maribel worries about the insult to her brother's hard work, a guest notes that Irene's territory borders a frontier known for rare items.
A sudden, heavy ha escapes as Irene confirms her lands border the frontier, a fact that clearly catches Maribel's attention. A series of worried wah-wah sounds surround Maribel as she fretfully wonders how to handle the escalating social tension. Irene points a finger at the centerpieces, cutting Maribel off to criticize the flowers as messy and full of weeds. Maribel stands stunned while Irene continues her critique of the floral arrangements in front of the other guests. Ignoring the princess's shock, Irene insists that elegant flowers must have matching colors, prompting a protective fairy to fly toward her. Irene condescendingly offers to teach the princess society's ways, just as Prince Randy's voice rings out across the garden. A close-up reveals a single tear welling in Maribel's eye as she processes the noblewoman's cruel remarks.
Maribel looks up in relief as Prince Randy and a stoic Alan arrive to intervene in the awkward conversation.
Tears shimmer in the princess's eyes as she gazes at her brother, who has arrived at the perfect moment. The surrounding guests watch the royal siblings with expressions of surprise and nervous anticipation. Standing firmly beside his sister, Randy addresses the group as a small fairy glows brightly nearby. A small, knowing smile plays on the blonde prince's lips as he prepares to defend his sister's efforts. Randy pointedly mentions that he personally helped prepare every detail for Maribel's very first tea party. He leans in closer to Irene, noting that she hasn't touched a single one of the sweets he carefully selected. With a bright but sharp smile, the prince suggests that perhaps the food simply isn't up to her refined tastes. Stuttering a frantic n-n, a flustered Irene quickly tries to claim she was just about to taste the desserts. Randy offers Irene a flower as a parting token, though the gesture feels more like a social challenge. The other guests gasp in awe upon hearing that the sparkling flowers were personally blessed by the fairies. A quick "sue" sounds as Randy proudly declares that Maribel is loved by the fairies, while Alan watches the stunned noblewomen. Alan adds that the fairies worked all morning on the flowers, noting they are far more valuable than anything money could buy. Alan stands with his arms crossed, his silent presence reinforcing the weight of his earlier statement. Randy asks Irene why she looks so pale, prompting her to hide behind her fan with a forced "oh ho ho" and desperate praise for the party. Maribel confesses her nerves to a fairy, admitting she would rather enjoy the day than deal with snide remarks. Looking out over her guests, the princess resolves to keep a genuine smile until the very end of the event. The tiny fairy looks back at the princess with a wide-eyed and surprised expression. A light-hearted ha fills the garden as the group finally settles into a more relaxed and cheerful atmosphere. A soft boffin sounds as Maribel collapses onto her bed that night, sighing about her total exhaustion. The fairy praises her performance, while Maribel vows to handle the next social event without relying so much on her brother.
The fairy reflects on how two-faced people are, noting how quickly they change their tune about the supposedly scary Alan.
Maribel stares up at the ceiling, lost in thought as she processes the day's many emotional shifts.
A curtain of dark, shimmering energy marks a transition in the narrative focus. A faint tee-tee sounds as Maribel recalls guests whispering about Alan's captivating charm and handsome face. The princess looks slightly perplexed as she ponders the conflicting rumors surrounding her companion. A somber narration reflects on the deep anxiety she felt during those early days in the palace.
A tired ugh escapes as Maribel's eyes begin to flutter shut, the weight of the day finally taking its toll.
Maribel falls into a peaceful sleep while her loyal fairy guardian keeps watch over her bedside. Later, the queen discovers an invitation addressed to her daughter from Lady Irene, the daughter of Count Herb. The letter explains that the invitation is intended as a formal apology for the incident at the previous tea party. The queen notes the bad rumors about Count Herb's family, but assumes a simple party shouldn't pose any real danger. A vibrant field of stars sparkles in the night sky, shifting the scene to a new day. Maribel thanks Alan as he helps her toward the waiting carriage for her journey to the Herb estate. Arriving at the Grand Manor, the narrative confirms they have reached the home of Lady Irene Herb. Maribel remembers Irene's malicious expression and feels a lingering sense of dread about the true nature of this invitation. The Golden Fairy asks the princess if she feels off. Alan explains he is filling in for the overprotective prince and jokes about Randy's strict orders to keep her safe. Will reflects on how much easier life would be if the prince possessed the ability to see fairies. A light-hearted laugh sounds from the princess as she relaxes in the black-haired man's presence. The scene shifts to the grand ballroom where the arrival of the princess causes a stir among the guests. Maribel enters the banquet hall with her golden companion hovering close behind.
A group of ladies reacts with surprise as the princess makes her formal entrance.
The blonde noblewoman with the fan offers a polite welcome and an apology for her previous conduct. She expresses her delight that Alan could attend the royal event alongside the princess. Alan maintains a cold, silent stare toward the blonde woman. A sharp inhale sounds as the blonde noblewoman hides a knowing glance behind her gold fan. A soft rustle sounds as Maribel notices the tension and quietly calls out to the man beside her. The woman shocks the princess and the fairy by mentioning her past engagement to Alan. Alan clarifies that the engagement was an old family arrangement later transferred to his younger brother. The blonde woman shifts her attention to enthusiastically welcome the arrival of Lord Raphael. Raphael and Alan exchange a look of intense, unspoken animosity as they pass each other. Raphael introduces himself to the princess, while his companion suggests they enjoy the foreign cuisine. The blonde noblewoman leads Raphael away to sample the various banquet offerings. Maribel and Will watch the pair leave in a state of quiet confusion. The princess remains preoccupied with the strange interaction she just witnessed between the two men. She reflects on the unsettling fact that Raphael did not acknowledge his brother with a single word. A sliding sound sounds as Alan offers his hand and invites the princess to join him for a dance.
Maribel blushes with surprise as she accepts his lead and moves onto the dance floor.
Will flies around the dancing couple, encouraging them to enjoy the festivities before heading home. The two move gracefully together amidst a shower of white flower petals and shimmering light. Will compliments Alan's dancing skill, while he explains he is simply fulfilling his duty as a substitute. A sudden gasp sounds as the princess spots a shadowy spirit animal prowling through the crowd. Numerous small fairies flutter around the massive ballroom chandelier, unnoticed by the humans. The crowd cheers for the fairy blessings, though the blonde noblewoman looks on with visible disdain. Elaborate dishes are served, highlighting the presence of rare and high-quality ingredients. Will greedily snatches a piece of meat while Alan continues to keep a watchful eye on their surroundings. Alan explains the geopolitical significance of the territory bordering the Wad Kingdom's farmlands. Maribel questions why the trade routes are passing through a territory they are not officially linked to. A sudden gasp sounds as she finds it suspicious that luxury goods are being exchanged so freely in this region. Alan reveals Randy's suspicions regarding secret dealings between the local lord and the neighboring kingdom. Maribel's attention is diverted as Will suddenly flies toward a distant corridor to investigate a presence. Alan watches the princess closely as they prepare to follow the fairy's lead. The trio slips away from the party to follow a trail of mysterious fairy energy coming from a side hall. A guard stands watch near a closed door in the dimly lit palace hallway. Alan pulls the princess into a protective embrace as they hide from the sentry's view. Will reminds the group that she is invisible to ordinary human sight. Alan warns that a sensitive person might still be able to detect the presence of magical beings nearby. Once the guard departs, Will leads the way up a staircase toward a specific room.
A sharp thud sounds as they arrive at a large wooden door, sensing a trace of fairy energy within.
Entering the darkened office, the princess scans the room for any signs of recent activity.
Maribel picks up a strange tool inscribed with runes that she finds impossible to read. Will identifies the markings as fairy language and expresses concern over the collection of strange tools.
The princess examines the desk, finding it cluttered with suspicious instruments and notes. Horror fills the princess as she discovers manacles etched with ancient anti-fairy runes.
A sudden, sounds as Alan becomes alert to a noise coming from outside the room. Alan hears a suspicious noise. A guard asks if someone is there. A guard notes they were ordered to deal with any intruders.
Maribel hides in complete care.
A black cat watches the scene shift. Alan hears a noise and they worry about being cut. The group fears discovery as a guard asks if someone is there.
Maribel trembles in the dark.
Lantern light fills the room.
A guard searches the shatters.
A guard demands to know who is hiding in the room.
Handcuffs sit on the desk. The guard concludes it was his imagination and suggests they return. Darkness fills the empty library. A sudden, quick click sounding startles Maribel as a light shines down.
A glowing fairy asks if they are okay.
Maribel expresses relief and amazement that the bookshelf was a hidden entrance.
Maribel searches for her companion.
Alan holds Maribel protectively.
Maribel apologizes for her loud reaction, while Will warns of the guards and tells them to look.
Will finds a hidden staircase. They stare into the passage. Will explains that her identity as a will-o'-the-wisp helped provide light for their path. Alan teases Will about her light, while the fairy tells them to keep moving. Tense silence fills the room. Maribel looks deeply concerned. Alan takes her hand firmly. They descend the dark stairs.
Will flies into the basement.
Will investigates bird cages and senses magic without finding any captive fairies. A bird cage glows with magic.
Maribel reaches for the caves.
She finds broken fairylings. Maribel is desperate to rescue the fairies, but Alan insists on gathering reinforcements from the Black Dog brothers. Alan explains they must gather evidence first to prevent the kidnapper from escaping. Stars sparkle in the night.
Prince Randy tells Maribel not to lose hope while their carriage rattles through the night.
They discuss the lack of found fairies and ask about news from the Magic Tower's messenger. A cloaked figure enters. The night sky transitions.
A cat watches the starry night transition.
They walk down the hall.
Randy hugs his sister tightly.
Alan watches the sibling reunion.
Maribel gasps that she cannot breathe, prompting a startled and apologetic Randy to release his hug.
Maribel identifies people from the Magic Tower and they discuss the tower's rare commercial activities.
Will notes the tower's dedication to research before Randy reveals that Professor Crowley is missing.
Maribel fears for the professor. Randy suggests the professor is simply busy, though Maribel notes he sounds just like Will. Randy comforts his worried sister. Raphael tells Maribel she looks tired and should rest instead of doing anything worrying. Maribel softly agrees to his request. Alan stands alone under the moonlight, lost in thought as he looks at the palace towers. A sudden thud sounds as a cloaked figure leaps from the balcony, pursued by a giant black wolf with blue flames. Startled, the figure reaches up to adjust their hood while a look of panic crosses their face.
Alan steps out and asks where Maribel is going.
Maribel's eyes widen in shock as she is discovered, while Will, the golden fairy, peeks out from her cloak.
Alan expresses concern for her family, but Will explains they need to find the missing fairies and reveals she made an invisibility cloak. Maribel clasps her hands together and pleads for Alan's cooperation. Alan remains silent, his red eyes focused as he clenches his fist in deliberation.
Maribel lights up with joy and thanks him enthusiastically.
Alan agrees to help on the condition that he goes with her, pulling his hood over his black hair. Maribel is stunned, while Will realizes that Alan had intended to follow them all along. Alan looks forward with a calm expression, having known their plan from the start. A playful black cat illustration marks a transition in their nighttime journey. The group races through the forest under a starry sky on the back of the flaming wolf. Alan holds Maribel close to keep her safe as they speed through the darkness. A loud skidding sound as the giant wolf comes to a halt in the dirt. They reach their destination and Maribel looks around the quiet clearing. Maribel scans the woods with a look of intense concentration.
Maribel questions if a nearby building is the Magic Tower, but Will immediately dismisses the idea.
Before them sits an old, abandoned log cabin nestled among the trees. Will insists this must be the location since there are no other structures nearby. The Golden Fairy complains about Maribel's poor map-reading skills. Will hovers over an old, weathered map to show their exact position.
Maribel explains that this was the only map provided by Professor Crowley.
A soft sniffing sound as the wolf investigates the area, leading Alan to ask what is wrong. Alan's eyes widen as he senses a strange presence nearby. He looks down at the ground and confirms they are in the right place.
Maribel and Will wait anxiously for his next move.
A notice explains that there are clear signs of someone recently entering and leaving the cabin.
Alan points to a set of fresh footprints leading into the structure. A light giggle sounds as Will remarks on how useful the wolf's sense of smell has been.
A heavy creak sounds as the wooden door is pushed open, revealing a dark interior. Maribel looks into the cabin with a mixture of curiosity and dread.
A message notes that the entire room is layered in thick dust.
Will notes the lack of any life, while Alan remarks that a lighter won't be necessary anymore.
Maribel smiles and reminds Will that she had mentioned that before.
A sharp creak sounds as a foot steps onto a hidden floorboard mechanism.
Alan reacts instantly, pulling Maribel into a protective embrace as a bright light erupts.
Will screams in alarm as she realizes they have stepped onto a magic circle. A glowing blue magic circle flares up on the dusty floor beneath the group. Alan shouts a warning that they have walked into a trap. Will and the wolf recoil as the magical energy begins to swirl violently.
A sharp zap sounds as Maribel urges the others to run and tries to destroy the circle with her own magic. A sudden boom sounds while the light intensifies, and Alan calls out the princess's name.
The fairy and the wolf watch in horror as their companions are enveloped by the magic.
Will wipes tears from her eyes as the intensity of the light blinds her.
A final statement reveals that the pair has completely vanished from the cabin. A low grrr sounds as the wolf and fairy remain alone in the now empty room.
Will looks on with a focused and determined expression. A sudden, tense cue sounds as the black-haired man clenches his fist in frustration.
Maribel's eyes widen as she processes the strange situation unfolding before her.
The group reaches a massive circular library and wonders about their current location.
A chaotic "Gya" rings out as the black-haired man protectively holds the princess while surrounded by cloaked figures. Drawing his blade, the black-haired man warns the others to stay back while manifesting a glowing blue shield. He stands his ground against the cloaked strangers, his defensive magic crackling in the air. Maribel notes that the shimmering barrier looks remarkably similar to the protective spells used by fairies. A faint "sa" accompanies a vision of a similar shield protecting a person from a monstrous threat. A small, soft "ha" sounds as a blonde child is revealed beneath one of the purple heads. Both the black-haired man and the princess stare in total disbelief at the young boy standing before them.
Low murmurs fill the room as the cloaked figures discuss the unexpected arrivals among the bookshelves.
The blonde child demands to know how they entered the tower, accusing them of being intruders. Standing at the top of the stairs, the boy and his companions look down at the two travelers.
Confusion ripples through the princess as she wanders deeper into the mysterious structure.
The scene shifts to a dimly lit stone corridor illuminated by glowing lanterns. A man with long white hair sits at a desk, surrounded by dizzying stacks of books and papers.
A sharp huff sounds as a gagged man struggles desperately behind the bars of a nearby cell.
The captive with green hair and glasses looks exhausted and fearful as he huffs behind his restraints.
Letters and books are strewn across the floor in front of the makeshift prison.
A brief transition shows a blonde noblewoman while the narrative focus returns to the stone library.
The bound man continues his muffled struggle, his breathing heavy in the silence of the basement.
The tension in the hidden room reaches its peak as the secret chamber is fully revealed. A heavy huff sounds as a hand rests upon an open book, marking a moment of grim concentration. The long-haired man looks up from his work with a cold and impassive expression. A series of "kan" sounds echo through the room as someone knocks on the heavy stone entrance.
The princess and her companion pause as they hear a muffled voice coming from within the room.
The sound of shifting debris fills the hall as the two travelers approach the hidden entrance. Alan prepares to force his way inside as the princess watches with a worried expression.
They gaze out at a vast, disorganized chamber filled with towering piles of ancient texts.
Maribel's eyes widen in shock as she takes in the scale of the messy library.
A startled "kya" escapes the princess as a pile of books collapses, prompting Alan to pull her to safety.
He holds her close, noting that the falling library was quite dangerous.
Looking up from his arms, she offers a quiet word of thanks for his quick reflexes. They stand together among the ruins of the bookshelves, staying alert for any further threats.
Hearing a noise, the princess rushes forward to check if anyone is trapped under the heavy volumes.
Her heart sinks as she spots a familiar face gagged and imprisoned behind iron bars. A pained ouch follows as Maribel tries to touch the bars, only to be repelled by a sudden magical shock.
Alan steps in front of her, warning her to stay back from the dangerous enchantment.
A frustrated sounds as the princess wonders who would commit such a cruel act. The long-haired man finally turns around and demands to know the identity of the two strangers.
A sudden pooh sounds as he summons a swirling vortex of flames around his hand.
Fire roars through the room as the white-haired man unleashes his power upon the intruders.
Alan shields the princess from the heat as burning papers flutter like autumn leaves around them. He glares at the magician through the smoke, his red eyes reflecting the dancing flames.
Terrified by the sudden aggression, Maribel can only watch the confrontation in silence.
She desperately begs the man to wait, explaining they only came to rescue Professor Crowley.
The magician pauses, looking confused as he asks who exactly Crowley is supposed to be.
He gestures toward the man in the cage, finally realizing that the intruders are referring to his prisoner.
With the realization of, the magician listens as the princess notes she did try to knock politely. The master of the tower warns them to knock next time if they want to avoid being turned into ashes, while Maribel attempts to explain herself.
Maribel gestures toward the bound Professor Crowley and demands to know how long he has been kept prisoner.
The long-haired man remains indifferent, stating that magicians can survive for months without basic necessities like food or water.
He asks Maribel if she is truly unafraid of him, noting that other magicians usually avoid him entirely.
Alan protectively pulls Maribel away as the master turns back to his desk, while Maribel notices a golden object hanging nearby. The master explains Crowley was found with forbidden tools and books, claiming he showed mercy by sparing his life.
The bound professor continues to struggle and huff behind his gad.
Maribel urgently clarifies that she found the whistle in the forest and the professor only came to the tower to investigate it.
The tower master offers a smug smirk in response to her explanation. He tells them to stop joking, revealing that the whistle is used for the forbidden magic known as practical application of fairies. The princess repeats the ominous phrase in a state of growing confusion.
The master explains that fairies are viewed as mere power sources for transformation and servitude by those who practice forbidden magic.
Maribel expresses her horror, arguing that fairies are living beings with their own independent wills. He notes that she is unlike most magicians who steal power, but he personally forbids destruction because it interferes with his research.
A sudden, sharp pow sounds as the master tosses a small object toward the princess.
Maribel catches a silver key as the master tells her to see for herself the true nature of the magic she is investigating.
A dark narration warns of the dangerous magic they are about to encounter.
The scene shifts to a quiet, starry night over a small wooden building in the woods.
Outside the cabin, Will worries about their safety and admits she never meant for them to get so involved with magicians. A sudden, sharp shah sounds as the black wolf retorts that he had no choice after learning humans kidnapped his kind.
Will reflects on their need for a human ally, specifically one they could easily manipulate to serve their interests.
A vision appears of a girl with long, dark hair, whose soul was already damaged and shattered.
Recalling their plan, Will explains they intended to reincarnate the girl with her memories and raise her to be an obedient human. Back at the tower, a heavy metal door with iron rings looms before the group. Freed from his restraints, Professor Crowley expresses his immense relief at having made it out alive.
Maribel asks if all magicians are like the master, prompting Crowley to describe him as exceptionally powerful and utterly ruthless.
Despite the warnings, the princess thinks to herself that the encounter wasn't as terrifying as she had expected. Alan suggests they proceed to investigate the forbidden magic now that they have the master's permission.
The three travelers stand before a massive dark wooden door, preparing to enter the restricted area.
A metallic ka-cha sounds as the key turns in the lock, followed by the heavy gee of the door opening. Maribel is struck with sudden shock as she looks into the dark chamber beyond the door.
They enter a room filled with scattered papers and jars, with Maribel's face illuminated by the bright sparkles of magic. The princess resolves to uncover the full truth behind the disappearance of the fairies. Her eyes widen in horror as she takes in the grim contents of the room. Crowley leads the way with a glowing blue lantern as the trio ventures deeper into the disorganized laboratory.
Alan looks around the dark room with a vigilant and suspicious expression. Noticing something disturbing, Alan quickly covers Maribel's eyes and tells her not to look. Crowley recoils from a horrible smell, noting that the exiled magician who lived here was banished 3 decades ago. A dark and distorted shadow falls across the wall of the basement.
Maribel gently reassures Alan that she will be fine, though her expression remains troubled.
The group gathers in the center of the room, surrounded by shelves and mysterious bird cages.
Maribel finds a large, worn book and prepares to open it.
A soft hic escapes her as she sees diagrams of fairy anatomy, including sketches of wings, skulls, and internal organs.
Alan takes the book from her and tells her she doesn't need to force herself to look at such things.
He watches her closely, his expression filled with unspoken concern for her well-being.
Crowley continues to examine the documents, oblivious to the emotional exchange behind him. They walk through the dark aisles, the blue light of the lantern casting long shadows across the floor.
Crowley suggests they split up to cover more ground in their search for clues about the missing fairies.
Maribel stands alone by a shelf, clutching a heavy volume to her chest.
Flipping through the pages, she finds more disturbing information and gasps in absolute horror. Crowley notes that such large-scale experiments are impossible for a single individual to conduct alone.
He reflects on the immense value of the top-tier whistle artifact he holds.
Maribel's eyes widen in sheer horror as she discovers something unsettling among the papers.
Crowley is startled as Maribel calls out to him, while Alan stands nearby. A blue glowing tank contains a small, horned beast suspended in fluid.
Alan identifies the creature as one of his captured kin, while Maribel wonders if these were the initial test subjects.
The princess finds a document depicting sketches of the monstrous chimeras. Crowley deduces that the researchers were attempting to combine fairies and animals to exert control over them. Maribel realizes with terror that the beasts attacking the border originated from this laboratory. Crowley understands why the master of the tower chose to seal away these horrific experiments.
The group gathers their thoughts as the full scope of the conspiracy becomes clear.
Runes are etched onto a heavy set of iron shackles resting on a table.
Crowley notes the massive funding required for this laboratory, while a vision shows Prince Salt and Jeanette among soldiers.
Alan explains that neighboring soldiers used the whistle to command the transformed monsters. Crowley concludes that a large organization must be backing the operation near the Wood Kingdom's border. Maribel is overcome with shock, realizing her own kingdom is likely behind the atrocities. The princess clutches her mouth as a wave of nausea hits her. Crowley calls her name as Maribel collapses under the weight of her distress. Horrible memories of a girl's suffering and the cold presence of Jeanette and Prince Salt resurface. A dark thought questions if Prince Salt and Jeanette are directly involved in the experiments. A heavy huff sounds as the princess gasps for air in her unconscious state. A hand firmly grips the fabric of a cloak during the tense moment. Alan carries the princess away, insisting she needs immediate rest.
Crowley rushes ahead with a lantern as the group flees the laboratory.
Alan pauses abruptly as a sharp t escapes him while he notices something on a desk. The intensity in Alan's red eyes grows as he focuses on a new discovery. Crowley looks back in confusion, wondering why the night has stopped.
Alan looks down at the fragile princess cradled in his arms.
He spots a set of papers left behind on one of the work tables. The documents reveal transaction records involving the prominent Marquis Reed and Count Herb families. Crowley is shocked to find a detailed transaction history among the discarded papers. He confirms that the names of high-ranking noble families are indeed listed on the ledger.
Crowley suggests that these records could lead them to the true masterminds.
Alan decides to take the evidence and orders Crowley to find a place for the princess to recover. Maribel lies in a daze, her face pale and troubled by her ordeal. A vision of a crying, bruised girl appears from the depths of her memory. The girl wonders why she must suffer alone while others are led away. Dark figures loom as a broken soul falls into a deep abyss. A cheerful fairy reaches out a hand, contrasting with the girl's shadowed and scarred face. A silent plea for help echoes through the darkness of the dream. A sudden, sharp, sounds as the princess jolts awake from her nightmare. Tears stream down Maribel's face as she breathes heavily, still caught in the terror of her dream. Waking up in a bedroom, she asks about her location, while Alan tells her to remain calm. Maribel remembers how Will aided her rebirth specifically so she could serve the fairies' interests. She realizes the fairies' kindness was calculated, much like the treatment of those she saw in the lab. The princess feels a deep conflict about being known as one beloved by fairies, while Alan watches her closely.
She forces a bright smile and claims they are very close to solving the mystery.
Alan stares at her with a grim and skeptical expression. He reaches out and grabs her shoulder with sudden force.
Alan angrily demands that she stop pretending to be okay when she is visibly suffering.
Maribel looks on in shock as Alan reassures her that she can always depend on him and her family during this difficult time.
A sudden, sharp gasha sounds as documents scatter across the floor while Alan helps the trembling princess to her feet.
Crowley expresses his intense frustration, noting that they were incredibly close to uncovering the ultimate truth regarding the missing fairies.
Alan firmly guides the princess away, insisting that the priority now is to return safely to the castle. Outside in the woods, the Black Wolf and Will the Fairy watch the group's departure with wary and observant expressions.
Will rushes toward the princess as they exit the cabin, calling out her name in a state of high alarm.
Maribel stares at the fairy with a distant and troubled gaze, prompting Will to ask what could be bothering her. Turning away from the fairy's concern, the princess quietly insists that nothing is wrong. A rhythmic rattle sounds as the carriage arrives at the castle, where Alan gallantly assists Maribel in stepping down.
Maribel's brother waits for them at the entrance, calling out to her with a look of immense relief. A silent and intense stare-down occurs as the brother examines the princess for any signs of injury or distress.
A soft "giu" sounds as her brother pulls her into a tight hug, though he warns her that he cannot shield her from the consequences this time. A dark and heavy atmosphere settles over Maribel as she sits at her desk, facing the reality of her punishment for sneaking away. The princess sighs as she begins writing her daily reflections, a month-long penance ordered for her reckless actions.
Maribel recalls the painful memory of her father scolding her for the very first time after her return.
The weight of her guilt grows as she remembers how her mother collapsed from the sheer stress of her disappearance. The narration confirms the devastating news that her mother was unable to eat and eventually lost consciousness. Slumping over her desk, the princess is consumed by the realization of the pain she caused her loved ones. She reflects sadly on how frail and thin her mother appeared when they were finally reunited. A soft "sha" sounds as Maribel kicks her desk in frustration, thinking about the widespread trouble her investigation has caused. She recalls being harshly reprimanded by her brother, who pleaded with her never to put the family through such worry again. A firm voice commands her to listen as she remains lost in her dark and cyclical thoughts. Her brother explains that their anger stems entirely from their deep love for her, and he demands she promise never to sneak out again.
Maribel looks down in silence, her expression shadowed by a mixture of guilt and lingering doubt.
Resting her head on the table, she meditates on the complicated nature of her family and the burdens they carry for her sake.
In the study, the king sits at his desk while Alan and the prince provide a detailed report on their findings. A crisp kasha sounds as a document is placed before the king for his immediate review. Alan explains that an exiled maid created the border monsters using fairies as a base, and that the Wad Kingdom now controls them. The king's expression hardens as he considers the fact that the aggressive Wood Kingdom is likely protecting the rogue mage.
Alan posits that the Wood Kingdom must have had a highly skilled advisor to coordinate such a complex and secretive operation.
A soft paw sounds as the king commends Alan for his work, stating they will now quietly gather information for a counterplan. A sudden "foo" sounds as Alan turns to leave the study, his mind clearly focused on a deeper suspicion. A sharp "ta" sounds as a hand rests on the heavy wooden door, pausing for a final, grave word. Alan informs the king that the fairies are directly involved and appear to be using Maribel for their own hidden agenda. The prince and king watch in silence as Alan explains that while the fairies may care for her, their motives are far from pure.
A heavy "ka" sounds as the door shuts, leaving the knight alone with his grim thoughts in the dimly lit hallway.
Alan's red eyes burn with intensity as he warns that contractless fairies are capable of betrayal and should never be fully trusted. A peaceful blue sky marks the passage of time as the story shifts forward 6 years into the future. The sun shines brightly over the elegant, arched walkways of the royal garden on a beautiful morning. A frantic "ah" sounds as a maid chases after the princess, pleading for her to at least wear her sun hat.
A cheerful "I don't need it" echoes as the grown Maribel runs playfully through the garden with a golden fairy.
She announces her intention to visit the training grounds where her brother and Alan are currently practicing.
Maribel beams with a radiant and mature beauty, her pink hair fluttering in the light breeze among the blooming flowers.
An ornate frame celebrates the milestone of her 18th birthday, marking her transition into full adulthood. Sunlight filters through the stone archway of the castle, casting long and peaceful shadows across the courtyard. Maribel reflects on the 6 long years that have passed since the fairies first began to vanish from the kingdom.
She recalls how her secret investigations into the Magic Tower documents led her to suspect the Reed and Herb noble families. Walking through the busy streets, she laments her inability to find any concrete evidence to link the nobles to the experiments. A sharp G sounds as Will the fairy glares suspiciously at a man passing by in the crowded market. A sudden, curious Kai sounds as the princess stops in her tracks, sensing something unusual nearby. Cheerful cheers erupt from the crowd. Maribel smiles excitedly at the sight. Spectators gather around the trading grounds. Knights clash swords in a match. Randy sweats during the intense spar. Alan focuses on his opponent's moves. The crowd roars with excitement. Maribel agrees with the lively mood. Maribel asks Will if any news was shared at yesterday's fairy banquet, but the fairy reports that she had no luck. Will notes that there have not been any sightings of the missing fairies recently either. Will mentions that it has been a long time since the marigold fairy disappeared, leaving the princess to thoughtfully respond. Pink-haired princess offers a bright smile. Narration explains that many fairies are still disappearing 6 years later as Will watches the horizon. Will looks down with somber eyes. A sudden za sounds as Maribel pauses, wondering if she has just seen some sort of trick. Randy asks about her maid while insisting that it is far too dangerous for her to be walking alone.
Maribel argues that they're only at the training grounds, but Randy dismisses her reasoning entirely.
A sharp Jiro sounds as he glares at the surrounding men, noting that many of them have their eyes on her. Randy urges her to follow him quickly since their parents need to speak with her immediately. Maribel looks back with a glance. Women cheer for Lord Randy as he passes by.
The blonde prince smiles charmingly.
Maribel continues looking back in silence. She reflects on how Alan's position within the royal palace remains quite complicated. The princess feels a sudden unease. Maribel looks back at Alan.
Alan looks at her with concern and asks what is wrong.
Maribel stammers that it is nothing. Narration explains her current happiness with her family, despite the painful memories of her past life. Maribel admits she is still deeply worried about the disappearance of the fairies. Narration describes her hope to live peacefully and avoid involvement with the Wood Kingdom. Night falls on a ransacked room. A mysterious voice calls out the name Maha in a dark, messy bedroom. A blonde woman enters the room and apologizes for interrupting while the girl was during her meal. She suggests that it is finally time for the girl to start thinking about her future marriage. The woman asks what she thinks about having the neighboring country's prince as her official fiancé. She describes the prince as sparkly, handsome, and coming from the fairy kingdom, promising that the girl will like him. A shadowy figure sits alone in the darkness, whispering the word fairy to themselves. The blonde woman promises to handle the matter herself before a heavy gasha sounds from the closing door. She walks away with cold determination. The king comforts a weeping Loan. Watching from the shadows, the blonde woman hides her expression behind an ornate purple fan. The pair reacts to an interaction. A frantic batsu sounds as a messenger calls out to the king in great distress. He reports that another concubine's newborn baby has disappeared without a trace immediately after birth. The king is shocked to learn that this marks the third disappearance in a row. The blonde woman closes her fan with a sharp snap, attributing the vanishings to the work of a demon. She explains that a powerful demon appeared 18 years ago, and she warns that it might still be lurking within the castle. The woman informs the king that she is thinking of attending the upcoming Saffin Festival. The king questions her choice, noting that the Irette Kingdom is widely considered to be a nest of demons. The blonde woman smiles while prodding. Below Chains and Blood, the woman instructs the man to summon her once Maha is done eating.
An oppressive shadow hangs over the room.
A red-haired character with a red eye reacts to a sudden, violent disturbance behind the curtains. A sudden and jarring noise echoes. Sunlight streams through the windows as a crisp kasha sounds from an opening door. The king and queen stand together, their expressions heavy with the weight of recent news. Randy approaches his father with concern, asking what has happened to cause such distress.
Maribel clutches her sun hat, looking on with wide, worried eyes.
The king explains that a letter has arrived from the Marquis Reed family. Alan's red eyes burn with quiet intensity as he listens to the mention of his former house. Shock ripples through Randy and Maribel as the contents of the letter are revealed. The king reveals the Reed family's desire to re-engage Alan to Lady Irene and restore him as their heir. Randy questions the sudden change of heart while a memory of the Marquis and his wife flickers by. Alan points out that Raphael was originally intended to engage Lady Irene and inherit the title. The king hesitates before explaining that the proposal includes an alternative plan. He reveals they are suggesting Raphael as a potential fiancé for Maribel, leaving her completely stunned. The royal couple watches their daughter.
The king elaborates on the Reed family's intent to bring Alan back into their fold through this marriage. The proposal details the restoration of Alan's status as the official heir of the Reed house. Maribel is stunned by the prospect. Randy shouts his refusal while pulling his sister away, declaring that such a match is absolutely impossible. Maribel watches the exchange with a sweat-dropped expression, while a tiny fairy hovers nearby. Alan stares ahead with dark intensity. A soft hee-hee sounds as the queen giggles at Randy's protectiveness, though Randy demands to know if his father will really approve. The king reassures them that he wants his children to marry for love rather than political gain. A relieved "phew" escapes Maribel's lips as the immediate threat of a forced engagement passes. Randy notes the strangeness of the Reeds wanting Alan back after their previous assassination attempts. Alan observes that the family has been uncharacteristically quiet since the failed attack in the forest. The king urges Alan to remain vigilant and never let his guard down.
Maribel reflects on the family's base.
The king adds that the Wood Kingdom has also proposed a marriage for Randy. Randy learns that the Wood royal family plans to visit the kingdom during the Saffin Festival. He questions the sudden proposal, doubting their claims that the visit is intended to foster peace. A sharp "ah" sounds as Maribel's heart sinks at the mention of the upcoming festival. The princess is visibly distressed. The king explains that King Salt and Queen Janet of Wood will be bringing Princess Maha, the one who proposed. Outraged, Randy exclaims that they have a lot of nerve to visit after so many border violations. A golden fairy watches with concern. Randy reminds them all that Wood is the country that sent assassins and schemed against them. Maribel reflects on how much more cunning the Wood Kingdom has become since her execution 18 years ago. The queen smiles as she promises to decline the engagement while providing flawless hospitality for the visit. Randy confirms that preparations for the hunting event are moving forward despite the fairy's suspicion about the queen's smile. The king finalizes the event preparations. The siblings share a worried glance. A heavy "ha" sounds as the weight of the situation settles on the young royals. Maribel forces a cheerful smile to hide her internal turmoil. Alan notices his sister's lingering unease. The Saffin Festival Day finally arrives. Maribel stands alone on Medopony. The palace towers over the kingdom under a clear sky. Standing on the balcony, Maribel calls out for her fairy companion as a soft "ah" escapes her lips. Falling leaves drift past as the narration explains how various festivals keep the princess occupied. The princess laments that she rarely has a moment to see her mother. Resting her chin on her hand, the pink-haired princess gazes out with a heavy heart. A title card announces the arrival of the Saffin Festival. Narration describes the harvest celebration that marks the symbolic end of the summer season. People gather to show their gratitude for the harvest and pay respects to the fairies. Maribel looks out from her high vantage point, lost in thought. She worries about the true intentions of those arriving for the festival. A close-up of her eye reveals the deep intensity of her growing suspicion. She reflects on a group that only places their faith in their own gods. Narration explains how they look down on the kingdom's fairies as primitive teachings. Her hands begin to tremble violently as they grip the stone railing of the balcony. Sweating from the stress, Maribel vows to protect her people no matter what happens. She reminds herself of the years spent training to master her magical abilities. A maid approaches to inform the princess that it is time for her audience in the chamber. Anxiety clearly shows on the princess's face as she prepares for the meeting. Carriages pull up to the palace entrance as the royal event begins. Walking down the long corridor, the princess is surrounded by the sounds of the crowd. She moves through the hall with a sense of increasing dread. Wide-eyed and pale, the princess continues her walk toward the audience chamber. Stopping at the railing, she looks down into the lobby and reacts with sheer shock. The sight of a blonde woman behind a fan triggers a sudden, gasping huff from the princess. Distorted memories of blood and a looming guillotine flood her mind. Overcome by a panic attack, Maribel collapses onto the palace floor. Struggling to breathe, she gasps out another huff while reflecting on the events of 18 years ago. The trauma of how she was treated in her past life resurfaces with painful clarity. A heavy huff sounds as the maid calls out in concern, while dark energy swirls around the princess. Her vision blurs and darkens as the weight of her memories becomes unbearable. Trapped in her terror, the princess feels as though she cannot draw breath. A hand reaches out through the darkness to steady her as she falls. The princess wonders what is happening as her consciousness begins to slip away. Tears well in her eyes as the world around her fades into shadow. Hearing a voice and feeling a hand on her shoulder, she breathes a hopeful huff for her brother. Her eyes snap open as she realizes someone is holding her upright.
Maribel begins to offer her thanks, assuming the man is Alan.
A blonde man with striking blue eyes looks at her with concern and asks if she is all right. Panic returns as the princess realizes the person catching her is not her brother. She identifies the man as Raphael, the younger brother of Lord Alan. The scene shifts to Maribel sweating and struggling in her sleep. Terrifying images of her past execution and a looming blade haunt her dreams.
She cries out in her sleep about her betrayal, while a vision of her falling into the abyss appears.
In her nightmare, she asks why she is the one destined to suffer so much. Her past self's eyes burn with rage as she declares she will never forgive those who wronged her. A sharp huff sounds as Maribel jolts awake in her bed, drenched in sweat.
She looks toward the large bedroom windows as the morning light filters in.
Sitting up in bed, the princess admits her desperate desire to forget her previous life.
A sobbing hic and a pained sound as she questions why she was reborn with such memories.
The morning sun shines into the room as the princess sits in silence.
The doctor examines the resting princess.
A quick click sounds as Maribel turns.
Randy rushes to his sister's side to ask how she's feeling.
The princess apologizes for the concern, admitting she struggled to sleep.
A gentle tap sounds against her bra.
Randy explains in alarm that she has a very high fever. Alan advises her to continue resting until her fever breaks.
A crisp click sounds as the door opens.
A man enters carrying fresh flowers.
Alan watches the guest with suspicion.
Raphael explains his concern over her collapse and expresses relief that she is finally awake.
Maribel manages a soft sound and thanks the man for his rescue. She realizes his voice is so much like Alan's that she confused the two.
Raphael bows and apologizes to the prince for his delayed greeting.
Randy acknowledges the man's help and offers his own gratitude for his sister's safety.
Alan remains quiet and observant. Raphael modestly declines the thanks, stating he only did what was right. Alan continues to watch him very closely.
The visitor decides to depart to ensure the princess gets the rest she needs.
A warm hee-hee sounds as Raphael smiles while addressing the princess. A quick tap sounds as Randy questions if the man is truly his sister's sitter. Randy complains that the man is clearly seeking power, though Alan points out that many men have similar motives.
Her parents rush through the door while calling out her name in a panic.
The princess looks at her peers.
The princess apologizes for being a burden, but her father reassures her that she is always their priority.
Her mother kindly tells her she is excused from the upcoming social event.
A soft pat sounds as her head is touched.
Maribel closes her eyes in relief.
She reflects with relief that she won't have to face Salt or Janet for some time.
The realization brings her a much-needed sense of comfort and peace.
A villager walks past a mysterious notice. Intricate symbols cover the small paper. A loud thud sounds while townspeople debate if the amulets are divine protection or a fraud.
The golden fairy watches with focus.
A sharp sounds as Will flies.
A sudden statement declares that fairies are actually the physical forms of demons.
Cloaked figures promise divine protection from demons while asking for donations in exchange for their charms. A parent wonders if the amulet can offer additional protection for their child.
Will flies through the open sky.
She holds the suspicious paper charm.
A thoughtful sounds as the golden fairy senses a familiar, lingering presence on the paper. She is struck by a sudden, terrifying possibility as memories surface. The fairy reacts with some shock.
The fairy realizes the energy on the paper belongs to the princess's previous incarnation.
Will speeds back toward the palace.
The cloaked figure smiles with malice.
Maribel remains awake in her quiet room.
The princess reflects on her family's warning, even though she feels a sense of urgency.
Will returns through the open balcony window while Maribel asks what happened.
Maribel asks why the fairy returned early, only to hear a warning about mysterious figures in the city.
Maribel stares in stunned silence.
The golden fairy reacts with surprise.
Maribel gazes down with deep concern.
Maribel admits she is only feeling a bit unwell, but the golden fairy reassures her that it is perfectly fine for her to skip the party.
The golden fairy remains alert and watchful.
Will agrees that there is absolutely no reason for the princess to meet with the visitors from the Wood Kingdom.
While resting in bed, Maribel asks what the fairy meant by her mention of suspicious people in the city.
Will explains that priests from the Wood Kingdom have been distributing charms in town and warns that something is clearly wrong. A dark vision of a smiling woman appears as Maribel questions the priests, only for a voice to warn they are possessed by demons.
Maribel finally reaches a firm decision. Determined to confront the danger, the princess clenches her fist and declares she will attend the party tonight.
As Maribel stands up to prepare, the Golden Fairy admits she has a very bad feeling about the situation.
The princess remains resolute despite her stress.
A powerful resolve to protect her family. The royal welcome banquet begins tonight.
Raphael stands beside the princess.
King Salt and Queen Janet arrive. King Salt mentions he heard the princess had collapsed and asks the queen how her daughter is doing.
King Randy steps forward to confidently state that his daughter is thankfully doing fine.
The two kings share a toast. Raising his glass, the king expresses his hope that their guests enjoy the evening's welcome banquet.
Maribel looks out from a balcony.
The princess reacts to a sudden presence.
A mysterious figure stands in the garden.
A dark shadow reaches for the balcony.
Will warns the princess to be careful because she is sensing the same strange fairy presence she detected at the border.